by H. Rider Haggard. The Ghost Kings. Northward, ever northward, journeyed Rachel with the ghost priests. For days and weeks they journeyed, slowly, and for the most part at night, since these people dreaded the glare of the sun. Sometimes she was borne along in a litter with Noia upon the shoulders of the huge slaves, but more often she walked between the litters in the midst of a guard of soldiers. For now she was so strong that she never seemed to weary, nor even in the fever swamps, where many fell ill, did any sickness touch her. Also, this labor of the body seemed to soothe her wandering and tormented mind, as did the touch of Noia's hand and the sound of Noia's voice. At times, however, her madness got hold of her, and she broke out into those bursts of wild laughter which had scared the Zulus. Then Edo would descend from his litter and lay his long fingers on her forehead and look into her eyes in such a fashion that she went to sleep and was at peace. But if Noia spoke to her in these sleeps, she answered her questions and even talked reasonably, as she had done before the people of Mafuti laid the body of Richard at her feet, and she stood upon the roof of the hut which Ishmael strove to climb. Thus it was that Noia came to learn all that had happened to her since they parted, for though she had gathered much from them, the Zulus could not, or would not, tell her everything. In days past, she had heard from Rachel of the lad, Richard Darrien, who had been her companion years before, through that night of storm on the island in the river, and now she understood that her lady loved this Richard, and that it was because of his murder by the wild brute Ibubesi that she had become mad. Yes, she was mad, and for that reason Noia rejoiced that the dwarf people were taking her to their home, since, if she could be cured at all, they were able to heal her, they, the great doctors. Moreover, if these priests and the Zulus would have let her go, whither else could she have gone, whose parent and lover were dead, except to the white people on the coast, who did not reverence the insane, as do all black folk, but would have locked her up in a house with others like her until she died. No, although she knew that there were dangers before them, many and great dangers, Noia rejoiced that things had befallen thus. Also in her tender care already, Rachel improved much, and Noia believed that one day she would be herself again. Only she wished that she and her lady were alone together, that there were no priests with them, and above all, no Edo. For Edo, as she knew well, was jealous of her authority over Rachel. Jealous, too, of the love that they bore one to the other. He wished to use this crazed white chieftainess, who had been accepted as their Nkosazana by the great Zulu people, for his own purposes. This had been clear from the beginning, and that was why, when he first heard of her, he had consented to go on the embassy to Dingaan, since by his magic he could foresee much of the future that was dark to Noia, whose blood was mixed, and who had not all the gifts of the Ghost Kings. Moreover, the mother of the trees was Noia's great aunt, being the sister of her grandfather, or of his father. Noia was not sure which, for she had dwelt among them but a few days, and never thought to inquire of the matter. But of one thing she was sure, that Edo, the first priest, hated this mother of trees, who was named Nya, and desired that when her tree fell, the next mother should be his servant, which Nya was not. Perhaps, reflected Noia, it was in his mind that her lady would fill this part, and being mad, obey him in all things. Still, she kept a watch upon her words, and even on her thoughts, for Edo and his fellow priests, Pani and Hana, were able to peer into human hearts and read their secrets. Also, she protected Rachel from him as much as she was able, never leaving her side for a moment, however weary she might be, for she feared lest he should become the master of her will. Only when the fits of madness fell upon her mistress, she was forced to allow Edo to quell them with his touch and eye, since herself she lacked this power. Nor dared she call the others to her help, for they were under the hand of Edo. Northward, ever northward. First they passed through the Zulus and their subject tribes who knew of them and of the Nkosazana. All of these were suffering from the curse that lay upon the land because, as they believed, there was blood between the Nkosazana and her people. The locusts devoured their crops and the plague ravaged their cattle, so that they were terrified of her and of the little gray folk with whom she traveled, the wizards who had shown fearful things to Dingaan and left him sick with dread. They fled at their approach, only leaving a few of their old people to prostrate themselves before this Nkosazana, who wandered in search of her own spirit, and the dream men who dwelt with the ghosts in the heart of a forest, and to pray her and them to lift this cloud of evil from the land, bringing gifts of such things as were left to them. At length all the Zulus were passed, and they entered into the territories of other tribes, wild, wandering tribes. But even these knew of the ghost kings, and attempted nothing against them, as they had attempted nothing against Noya and her escort, when she traveled through this land on her embassy to the people of the trees. Indeed, some of their doctors would visit them at their camps, and ask an oracle, or an interpretation of dreams, or a charm against their enemies, or a deadly poison, offering great gifts in return. At times Edo and his fellow priests would listen, and the giants would bring a tiny bowl filled with dew, into which they gazed, telling them the pictures they saw there, though this they did but seldom, as the supply of dew, which they had brought with them from their own country, ran low, and since it could not be used twice, they kept it for their own purposes. Next they came to a country of vast swamps, where dwelt few men and many wild beasts, a country full of fevers and reeds and pools, in which lived snakes and crocodiles. Yet no harm came to them from these things, for the ghost priests had medicines that warded off sickness and charms that protected them from all evil creatures, and in their bowls they read what road to take and how dangers could be avoided. So they passed the swamps safely. Only here that slave whom Edo had cursed at the kraal of Dingaan, and who from that day onward had wasted till he seemed to be nothing but a great skeleton, sickened and died. "Did I not tell you that it should be so?" said Edo to the other slaves, who trembled before him, as the reeds tremble in the wind. "Be warned, ye fools, who think that the strength of men lies in their bodies and in their spears." Then he kicked the corpse of the dead giant gently with his sandaled foot, and bade his brothers throw him into a pool for the crocodiles to eat. Having passed the swamps and many rivers, at length they turned westward, traveling for days over grassy uplands like to those of Natal, among which wandered pastoral tribes with their herds of cattle. On these plains were multitudes of game and many lions, especially in the bush-clad slopes of great isolated mountains that rose up here and there. These lions roared round them at night, but the priests did not seem to be afraid, for when the brutes became overbold, they placed deadly poison in the carcasses of buck that the nomad tribes brought them as offerings, of which the lions ate and died in numbers. Also they sold some of the poison to the tribe for a great price in cattle, as to the livery of which cattle they gave minute directions, for they knew that none dared to cheat the mother of trees and her prophets. After the plains were left behind, they reached a vast, fertile, and low-lying country that sloped upwards for miles and miles, which, as Noah explained to Rachel when she would listen, was the outer territory of the ghost people. For here dwelt the race of the Umkulus, or great ones, who were their slaves, that folk to which the soldiers of their escort belonged. Of these there were thousands and tens of thousands who earned their living by agriculture, since, although they were so huge and fierce-looking, they did not fight unless they were attacked. The chiefs of this people had their dwellings in vast caves in the sides of cliffs, which, if need be, could be turned into impregnable fortresses. But their real ruler was the mother of trees, and their office was to protect the country of the trees and furnish it with food, since the tree people were dreamers who did little work. While they traveled through this land, all the headmen of the Umkulus accompanied them, and every morning a council was held, at which these made report to the priests of all that had chanced of late, and laid their causes before them for judgment. These causes Edo and his fellow priests heard, and settled as seemed best to them, nor did any dare to dispute their rulings. Indeed, even when they deposed a high chief and set another in his place, the man who had lost all knelt before them and thanked them for their goodness. Also they tried criminals who had stolen women or committed murder, but they never ordered such men to be slain outright. Sometimes Edo would look at them dreamily and curse them in his slow, hissing voice, bidding them waste in body and in mind, as he had done to the soldier at Umguntlovu, and die within 1 year, or 2 or 3, as the case might be. Or sometimes, if the crime was very bad, he would command that they should be sent to travel in the desert, that is, to wander to and fro without food or water until death found them. Now and again, miserable-looking men, mere skeletons, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to start from their heads, would appear at their camps weeping, and imploring that the curse which had been laid upon them in past days should be taken off their heads. At such people, Edo and his brother priests, Pani and Hana, would laugh softly, asking them how they throve upon the wrath of the mother of trees, and whether they thought that others who saw them would be encouraged to sin as they had done. But when the poor wretches prayed that they might be killed outright with the spear, the priests shrank up in horror beneath their umbrellas, and asked if they were mad that they should wish them to sprinkle their trees with blood. One morning, a number of these bewitched Umkulus, men, women, and children, appeared, and when the 3 priests mocked them, as was their wont, and the guards, some of whom were their own relatives, sought to beat them away with sticks, threw themselves upon the ground, and burst into weeping. Rachel, who was camped at a little distance with Noah, in a reed tent that the guard had made for her, which they folded up and carried as they did the umbrellas, heard the sound of this lamentation, and came out, followed by Noah. For a space she stood contemplating their misery, with a troubled air, then asked Noah why these people seemed so starved, and why they wept. Noah told her that when she was on her embassy, the head of their kraal, an enormous man of middle age, whom she pointed out to Rachel, had sought to detain her because she was beautiful, and he wished to make her his wife, although he knew well that she was on an embassy to the mother of the trees. She had escaped, But it was for this reason that the curse of which they were perishing had been laid upon him and his folk. Now Rachel went on to where the 3 priests sat beneath their umbrellas, dozing away the hours of sunlight, beckoning to the doomed family to follow her. "Wake, priests," she cried in a loud voice, and they looked up, astonished, rubbing their eyes, and asked what was the matter. "This," said Rachel, "I command you to lift the weight of your malediction off the head of these people who have suffered enough." "Thou commandest us?" exclaimed Edo, astonished. "And if we will not, beautiful one, what then?" "Then," answered Rachel, "I will lift it and set it onto your heads, and you shall perish as they are perishing. Oh, you think me mad, you priests, who kill more cruelly than did the Zulus, and mad I am whose spirit wanders. Yet I tell you that new powers grow within me, though whence they come I know not, and what I say I can perform." Now they stared at her, muttering together, and sending for a wooden bowl, peeped into it. Whatever it was that they saw there did not please them, for at length Edo addressed the crowd of suppliants, saying, "The mother of trees forgives, the knot she tied she looses, the tree she planted she digs up. You are forgiven. Bones, put on strength, mouths, receive food. Eyes, forget your blindness, and feet, your wanderings. Grow fat, and laugh, increase, and multiply. For the curse we give you a blessing. Such is the will of the mother of trees." "Nay, nay," cried Rachel, when she understood their words. "Believe him not, ye starvelings. Such is the will of the Nkosazana of the Zulus, she who has lost her spirit and another's, and travels all this weary way to find them." Then her madness seemed to come upon her again, for she tossed her arms on high and burst into one of her wild fits of laughter. But those whom she had redeemed heeded it not, for they ran to her, and since they dared not touch her, or even her robe, kissed the ground on which she had stood and blessed her. Moreover, from that moment they began to mend, and within a few days were changed folk. This Noia knew, for they followed up Rachel to the confines of the desert, and she saw it with her eyes. Also the fame of the deed spread among the Yamkulu people, who groaned under the cruel rule of the ghost kings, and mad or sane, from that day forward, they adored Rachel even more than the Zulus had done, and like the Zulus believed her to be a spirit. No mere human being, they declared, could have lifted off the curse of the mother of the trees from those upon whom it had fallen. Thenceforth Edo, Pani, and Hana hid their judgments from Rachel, and would not suffer such suppliants to approach the camp. Also, when they seized a number of men, because these had conspired together to rebel against the ghost people, and brought them on towards their own country for a certain purpose, they forced them to act as bearers like the others, so that Rachel might not guess their doom. For now, with all their power, they also were afraid of this white Nkosazana, as Dingaan had been afraid. So they traveled up this endless slope of a fertile land, leaving all the kraals of the giant Umkulus behind them, and one morning at the dawn camped upon the edge of a terrible desert, a place of dry sands and sun-blasted rocks that looked like the bottom of a drained ocean, where nothing lived save the fire lizards and certain venomous snakes that buried themselves in the sand, all except their heads, and only crawled out at night. After the people of the Nkulus, this horrible waste was the great defense of the ghost kings, whose country it ringed about, since none could pass it without guides and water. Indeed, Noia had been forced to stay here for days with her escort, until the mother of the trees, learning of her coming, in some strange fashion, had sent priests and guards to bring her to her land. But the Zulus who were with her they did not bring, except one witch doctor, to bear witness to her words. These they left among the Nkulus till she should return, nor were those Zulus sorry, who had already heard enough of the magic of the Ghost Kings, and feared to come face to face with them. But it is true that they also feared the Nkulus, whom because of their great size and fierceness of their air, the Zulus took to be evil spirits, though if this were so, they could not understand why they should obey a handful of grey dwarfs who lived far from them, beyond the desert. Still these Nkulus did them no harm, for on her return Noia found them all safe and well. That afternoon Rachel and the dwarves plunged into the dreadful wilderness, heading straight for the ball of the sinking sun. Here, although she wished to do so, she was not allowed to walk, for fear lest the serpents should bite her, said Edo, but must journey in the litter with Noia. So they entered it, and were borne forward at a great pace, the bearers traveling at a run, and being often changed. Also many other bearers came with them, and on the shoulders of each of them was strapped a hide bag of water. Of this they soon discovered the reason, for the sand of that wilderness was white with salt. The air also seemed to be full of salt, so that the thirst of those who traveled there was sharp and constant, and if it could not be satisfied, they died. It was a very strange journey, and although she did not seem to take much note of them at the time, its details and surroundings burned themselves deeply into Rachel's mind. The hush of the infinite desert, the white moonlight gleaming upon the salt white sand, the tall rocks which stood up here and there like unfinished obelisks and colossal statues, the snowy clouds of dust that rose beneath the feet of the company, the hoarse shouts of the guides, the close heat, the halts for water, which was greedily swallowed in great gulps, the occasional cry and confusion when a man fell out exhausted, or because he had been bitten by one of the serpents. All these things, amongst others, were very strange. Once Rachel asked vaguely what became of these outworn and snake-poisoned men, and Noia only shook her head in answer, for she did not think it fit to tell her that they were left to find their way back, or to perish, as might chance. All that night, and for the first hours of the day that followed, they went forward swiftly, camping at last to eat and sleep in the shadow of a mass of rock that looked like a gigantic castle with walls and towers. Here they remained in the burning heat until the sun began to sink once more, and then went on again, leaving some of the bearers behind them, because there was no longer water for so many. There the great men sat in patient resignation and watched them go. They who knew that having little or no water, few of them could hope to see their homes again. Still, so great was their dread of the ghost priests that they never dared to murmur, or to ask that any of the store of water should be given to them, they who were but cattle, to be used until they died. The second night's journey was like the first, for this desert never changed its aspect, and on the following morning they halted beneath another pile of fantastic sand-burnished rocks, from some of which hung salt-like icicles. Here one of the bearers, who had been denied water as a punishment for laziness, although in truth he was sick, began to suck the salt icicles. Suddenly he went, raving mad, and rushing with a knife at Edo, Pani, and Hana, where they sat under their cane umbrellas, that, for the sake of coolness, were damped with this precious water, he tried to kill them. Then, as they saw the knife gleaming, all their imperturbable calm departed from these dwarfs. They squeaked in terror, with thin voices, as rats speak. They rolled upon the ground, yelling to the slaves to save them from a red death. The man was seized, and though he fought with all his giant strength, held down and choked in the sand. Once, however, he twisted his head free, howling a curse at them. Also he managed to hurl his knife at Edo, and the point of it scratched him on the hand, causing the pale blood to flow, a sight at which Edo and the other priests broke into tears and lamentations that continued long after the Nkulu was dead. "Why are they such cowards?" asked Rachel dreamily, for she had not seen the murder of the slave, and thought that Edo had only scratched himself. "Because they fear the sight of blood, Zula," answered Noya, "which is a very evil omen to them. Death they do not fear, who are already among ghosts, but if it is a red death, their souls are spilt with their life, or so they believe." Towards noon that day, the sky banked up with lurid-colored clouds. The sun, which should have shone so hotly, went out, and a hush that was almost fearful in its heat and intensity fell upon the desert. The Nkulu bearers became disturbed, and gathered together into knots, talking in low tones. Edo and his brother priests, who, either because of the adventure of the morning or the oppressive air, could not sleep, as was usual with them, were also disturbed. They crept from beneath their umbrellas, which, as the sun had vanished, were of no use to them, and stood together staring at the salty plain, which under that leaden and lowering sky looked white as snow, and at the brooding clouds above. They even sent for their bowls to read in them pictures of what was about to happen, but there was no dew left, so these could not be used. Then they consulted with the captains of the bearers, who told them what no magic was needed to guess, that a mighty storm was gathering, and that if it overtook them in the desert, they would be buried beneath the drifting sand. Now this was a white death, which the dwarves did not seem to desire, so they ordered an instant departure, instead of delaying the start until sunset, as they had intended, for then, if all went well, they would have arrived at their homes by dawn, and not in the middle of the night. So that litters were made ready, and they went forward through the overpowering heat, that caused the bearers to hang out their tongues and reel as they walked. Towards evening, the storm began to stir. Little wandering puffs of wind blew upon them and died away, and lightnings flickered intermittently. Then a hot breeze sprang up that gradually increased in strength, until the sand rolled and rippled before it, now one way and now another, for this breeze seemed to blow in turn from every quarter of the heavens. Suddenly, however, after trying them all, it settled in the west and drove straight into their faces with ever-increasing force. Now Edo thrust out his head between the curtains of his litter and called to the bearers to hurry, as they had but a little distance of desert left to pass, after which came the grass country, where there would be no danger from the sand. They heard and obeyed, changing the pole gangs frequently, as those who carried the litters became exhausted. But the storm was quicker than they. It burst upon them while they were still in the waste, though not in its full strength. Then the darkness came, utter darkness, for no moon or stars could be seen, and salt and sand drove down on them like hail. Through it all, the bearers fought on, though how they found their way, Noya, who was watching them, could not guess, since no landmarks were left to guide them. They fought on, blinded, choked, with the salt sand that drove into their eyes and lungs, till man after man they fell down and perished. Others took their places, and yet they fought on. It must have been near to midnight when the company, or those who were left of them, staggered to the edge of that dreadful wilderness which was but a vast plain of stone and sand, bordered on the west, as on the east, by slopes of fertile soil. For a while, the fierce tempest lifted a little, and the light of the stars, which struggled through breaks in the clouds, showed that they were marching down a steep descent of grassland. Thus they went on for several more hours, till at length the bearers of the litter, in which were Rachel and Noah, who for a long time had been staggering to and fro like drunken men, came to a halt, and litter and all sank to the ground, utterly exhausted. Rachel and Noah disentangled themselves from the litter, for they were unhurt, and stood by it, not knowing where to go, till presently 2 other litters containing the priests came up, for the third had been abandoned, and his occupant crowded in with Edo. Now a great clamor arose in the darkness, the priests hissing commands to the surviving bearers to take up the litter and proceed. But great as was their strength, this the poor men could not do. There they lay upon the ground, answering that Edo might curse them if he wished, or even kill them as their brothers had been killed, but they were unable to stir another step until they had rested and drunk. Where they were, there they must lie until rain fell. Then the priests wished Rachel to enter one of their litters, leaving Noah to walk, which they were afraid to do themselves. But when she understood, Rachel cut the matter short by answering, "Not so, I will walk," and picking up the spear of one of the fallen Nkulu to serve as a staff, she took Noah by the hand and started forward down the hill. One of the priests clasped her robe to draw her back, but she turned on him with the spear, whereon he shrank back into his litter like a snail into his shell, and left her alone. So, following the steep path, they marched on, and after them came the 2 litters with the priests, carried by all the bearers who could still stand, for these old men weighed no more than children. Far below them rose a mighty sound as of an angry sea. "What is that noise?" called Rachel into the ear of Noah, for the gale was rising again. "The sound of the wind in the forest where the tree folk dwell," she answered. Then the dawn broke, an awful, blood-red dawn, and by degrees they saw. Beneath them ran a shallow river, and beyond it, stretching for league upon league, farther than the eye could see, lay the mighty forest, whereof the trees soared 200 feet or more into the air, the dark, illimitable forest that rolled as the sea rolls beneath the pressure of the gale, and indeed, seen from above, looked like a green and tossing ocean. At the sight of the water, Rachel and Noah began to run towards it hand in hand, for they were parched with thirst, whose mouths were full of the salt dust of the desert. The bearers of the litters, in which were the 3 priests, ran also, paying no heed to the cries of the dwarfs within. At length it was reached, and throwing themselves down, they drank until that raging thirst of theirs was satisfied. Even Edo and his companions crawled out of their litters and drank. Then, having washed their hands and faces in the cool water, they forded the fleet stream, and, filled with a new life, followed the road that ran beyond towards the forest. Scarcely had they set foot upon the farther bank, when the heart of the tempest, which had been eddying round them all night long, burst over them in its fury. The lightnings blazed, the thunder rolled, and the wild wind grew to a hurricane, so fierce that the litters in which were Edo, Pani, and Hana were torn from the grasp of the bearers and rolled upon the ground. From the wreck of them, for they were but frail things, the little gray priests emerged trembling, or rather were dragged by the hands of their giant bearers, to whom they clung as a frightened infant clings to its mother. Rachel saw them and laughed. "Look at the masters of magic," she cried to Noya. "Those who kill with a curse, those who rule the ghosts." And she pointed to the tiny, contemptible figures with fluttering robes being dragged along by those giants whom but a little while before they had threatened with death. "I see them," answered Noya into her ear. "Their spirits are strong when they are at peace, but in trouble they fear doom more than others. Now if I were those Umkulu, I would make an end of them while they can. But these great patient men did otherwise. Indeed, when the dwarfs, worn out and bewildered by the hurricane, could walk no more, they took them up and carried them, as a woman carries a babe. Now they were passing a belt of open land, between the river and the forest, in which terrified mobs of cattle rushed to and fro, while their herds, slave men of large size like the Nkulu, tried to drive them to some place where they would be safe from the tempest. In this belt also grew broad fields of grain, which furnished food for the tree folk. At last they came to the confines of the forest, and Rachel, looking round her with wondering eyes, saw at the foot of each great tree a tiny hut shaped like a tent, and in front of the hut a dwarf, seated on the ground, staring into a bowl of water and beating his breast with his hands. "What do they?" she asked of Noya. "They strive to read their fates, lady, and weep because the wind ripples the dew in their bowls, so that they can see nothing, and cannot be sure whether their tree will stand or fall. Follow me, follow me. I know the way. Here we are not safe." The hurricane was at its height. The huge trees about them rocked and bent like reeds. Great boughs came crashing down. One of them fell upon a praying dwarf and crushed him to a pulp. Those around him saw it and uttered a wild, shrill scream. Edo, Pani, and Hana saw it and screamed also, in the arms of their bearers, for this sight of blood was terrible to them. The forest was alive with the voices of the storm. It seemed to howl and groan, and the lightnings illumined its gloomy aisles. The grandeur and the fearfulness of the scene excited Rachel. She waved the spear she carried and began to laugh in the wild fashion of her madness, so that even the gray dwarfs, seated each at the foot of his tree, ceased from his prayers to glance at her askance. On they went, expecting death at every step, but always escaping it, until they reached a wide clearing in the forest. In the center of this clearing grew a tree more huge than any that Rachel had ever dreamed of. The bole of it, that sprang 100 feet without a branch, was thicker than Dingaan's great hut, and its topmost boughs were lost in the scudding clouds. In front of this tree was gathered a multitude of people, men, women, and children, all dwarfs, and all of them on their knees, engaged in prayer. At its bole, by a heart-shaped house, stood a little figure, a woman whose long gray hair streamed upon the wind. "The mother of trees," cried Noya through the screaming gale. "Come to her, she will shelter us." And she gripped Rachel's arm to lead her forward. Scarcely had they gone a step when the lightning blazed above them fearfully, and with it came an awful rush of wind. Perhaps that flash fell upon the tree, or perhaps the wind snapped its roots. At least its mighty trunk burst in twain, and with a crash that for a moment seemed to master even the roar of the volleying thunder, down it came to earth. 2 huge limbs fell on either side of Rachel and Noya, but they were not touched. A bough struck the Mkulu slave who was carrying Edo, and swept off his head, leaving the dwarf unharmed. Another bough fell upon Pani and his bearer, and buried them in the earth beneath its bulk, so that they were never seen again. As it chanced, the most of the worshippers were beyond the reach of the falling branches, But some of these that were torn loose in the fall, or shattered by the lightning, the wind caught and hurled among them, slaying several and wounding others. In 10 seconds the catastrophe had come and gone. The queen tree that had ruled the forest for 1,000 years was down, a stack of green leaves, through which the shattered branches showed like bones, and a prostrate, splintered trunk. The shock threw Noah and Rachel to the ground, but Rachel, rising swiftly, pulled Noah to her feet after her, then, acting upon some impulse, leaped forward, and climbing onto the trunk where it forked, ran down it till she almost reached its base, and stood there against the great shield of earth that had been torn up with the roots. After that last fearful outburst, a stillness fell. The storm seemed to have exhausted itself, at any rate for a while. Rachel was able to get her breath and look about her. All around were lines of enormous trees, solemn aisles that seemed to lead up to the queen of the trees, and down these aisles, piercing the shadows cast by the interlacing branches overhead, shone the lights of that lurid morning. Rachel saw, and something struggled in the darkness of her brain as the light struggled in the darkness of the forest aisles. She remembered. Oh, what was it she remembered? Now she knew. It was the dream she had dreamed upon the island in the river, years and years ago, a dream of such trees as these, and of little gray people like to these, and of the boy, Richard, grown to manhood, lashed to the trunk of one of the trees. What had happened to her? She could recall nothing since she saw the body of Richard upon its bier in the Kraal Mafuti. But this was not the Kraal Mafuti, nor had Noah, who stood at her side, been with her there. Noah, who had gone on an embassy to her father's folk, the dwarf people. Ah, these people were dwarves. Look at them running to and fro, screaming like little monkeys. She must have been dreaming a long bad dream, whereof the pictures had escaped her. Doubtless she was still dreaming, and presently would awake. Well, the torment had gone out of it, and the fear, only the wonder remained. She would stand still and see what happened. Something was happening now. A little thin hand appeared, gripping the rough bark at the side of the fallen tree. She peeped over the swell of it and saw an old dwarf woman with long white hair, whose feet were set in a cleft of the shattered bole, and who hung to it as an ape hangs. Beneath her to the ground was a fall of full 30 feet, for the base of the bole was held high up by the roots, so that the little woman's hair hung down straight towards the ground, whither she must presently fall and be killed. Rachel wondered how she had come there, if she had clung to the trunk when it fell, or been thrown up by the shock, or lifted by a bough. Next she wondered how long it would be before she was obliged to leave go, and whether her white head or her back would first strike the earth, all that depth beneath. Then it occurred to her that she might be saved. "Hold my feet," she said to Noah, who had followed her along the trunk, speaking in her own natural voice, at the sound of which Noah looked at her in joyful wonder. "Hold my feet. I think I can reach that old woman." And without waiting for an answer, she laid herself down upon the bole, her body hanging over the curve of it. Now Noah saw her purpose, and seating herself with her heels set against the roughness of the bark, grasped her by the ankles. Supporting some of her weight on one hand, with the other, Rachel reached downwards, all the length of her long arm, and just as the grasp of the old woman below was slackening, contrived to grip her by the wrist. The dwarf swung loose, hanging in the air, but she was very light, of the weight of a 5-year-old child, perhaps no more, and Rachel was very strong. With an effort, she lifted her up till the monkey-like fingers gripped the rough bark again. Another effort, and the little body was resting on the round of the tree. One more, and she was beside her. Now Rachel rose to her feet again and laughed. But it was not the mad laughter that had scared Ishmael and the Zulus. It was her own laughter, that of a healthy, cultured woman. The little creature, crouching on hands and knees at Rachel's feet, lifted her head and stared with her round eyes. At that moment, too, the sun broke out, and its rays, shining where they had never shone for ages, fell upon Rachel, upon her bright hair and the white robes in which the dwarves had clothed her, and the gleaming spear in her hand, causing her to look like some ancient statue of a goddess upon a temple roof. "Who art thou?" said the dwarf woman in the hissing voice of her race. "Thou beautiful one? I know. Thou art that Inkosazana of the Zulus, of whom we have had many visions, she for whom I sent. But the Inkosazana was mad. She had lost her spirit. It has been seen here, beautiful one. Thou art not mad." "What does she say, Noya?" asked Rachel. "I can only understand some words." Noya told her, and Rachel hid her eyes in her hand. Presently she let it fall, saying, "She is right. I lost my spirit for a while. It went away with another spirit. But I think that I have found it again. Tell her, Noya, that I have traveled far to seek my spirit, and that I have found it again." Noya, who could scarcely take her eyes from Rachel's face, obeyed, but the old woman hardly seemed to heed her words. A grief had got hold of her. She rocked herself to and fro like a monkey that has lost its young and cried out, "My tree has fallen, the tree of my house, which stood from the beginning of the world has fallen, but that of Edo still stands." And she pointed to another giant of the forest that soared up unharmed at a little distance. "Nia's tree has fallen, Edo's tree still stands. His magic has prevailed against me. His magic has prevailed against me." As she spoke, a man appeared, scrambling along the bowl towards them. It was Edo himself. His round eyes shone. On his pale face there was a look of triumph, for whoever might be lost, the danger had passed him by. "Nia," he piped, tapping her on the shoulder, "thy ghost has deserted thee, old woman. Thy tree is down. See, I spit upon it," and he did so. "Thou art no longer mother of trees. Thou art only the old woman Nia. The ghost people, the dream people, the little gray people have a new queen, and I am her minister, for I rule her spirit. Yonder she stands," and he pointed at the tall and glittering Rachel. "Now thou, new-born mother of the trees, who wast the Inkosazana of the Zulus, obey me. Give death to this old woman, the Red Death, that her spirit may be spilt with her blood and lost forever. Give it to her with that spear in thy hand, while I hide my eyes, and reign thou in her place through me." And he bowed his head and waited. "Not the Red Death, not the Red Death," wailed Nia. "Give me the White Death and save my soul, beautiful one, and in return I will give thee something that thou desirest, who am still the wisest of them all, though my tree is down." Noya whispered for a while in Rachel's ear. Then, while all the dwarf people gathered beneath them watching, Rachel bent forward and, putting her arms about the trembling creature, lifted her up as though she were a child and held her to her bosom. "Mother," she said, "I give thee no death, red or white. I give thee love. Thy tree is down. Sit thou in my shadow and be safer. On him who harms thee," and she looked at Edo, "on him shall the Red Death fall." When Edo understood these words, he lifted his head and stared at Rachel, amazed. "This is thy doing, bastard," he said savagely, addressing Noya, who had translated them. "I have felt thee fighting against me for long, and now thou causest this Inkosazana to defy me. It was thou who didst work upon that old woman, thine aunt, to command that the white witch should be brought hither. And because as yet I dared not disobey. I made a terrible journey to bring her. Yes, and I did this gladly, for when my eyes fell upon her, there in the town of Dingaan, I saw that she was great and beautiful, but that her spirit had gone, and I knew that I could make her mouth to speak my words, and her pure eyes to see things that are denied to mine, even the future as, when I bade her, she saw it yonder, in the court of Dingaan. But now it seems that her spirit has returned to her, so that there is no room for mine in her heart, and she speaks her own words, not my words, and thou hast done this thing, O bastard. Perhaps, answered Noya unconcernedly. Thou thinkest, went on Edo, in his fury beating the bowl on which he sat, thou thinkest to protect that old hag Nya, because her blood runs in thee, but fool, it is in vain, for her tree is down, and as its leaves wither, and its sap dries up, so must she wither, and her blood dry up, until she dies, she who thought to live on for many years. What does that matter? Asked Noya, seeing that then she will only join the great company of the ghosts, with whom she longs to be, and return with them to torment thee, Edo, until thou too art one of them, and lookest on the face of judgment. Thou thinkest, screamed the dwarf, ignoring this ominous suggestion, thou thinkest, when she is gone, to be queen in her place, or to rule as high priestess through this white one. If I do, that will be a bad hour for thee, Edo, replied Noya. It shall not be, woman. No bastard shall reign here as mother of the trees, while the nations around cringe before her feet. I have spells, I have poisons, I have slaves who can shoot with arrows. Then use them, if thou canst, thou evildoer, said Noya contemptuously. I will use them all, and not on thee only, but on that white witch whom thou lovest. She shall never pass living from this land that is ringed in by the desert and the forest. She shall choose me to reign through her as her high priest, or she shall die miserably. For a little while that old hag Nia may protect her with her wisdom, but when she passes, as she must, and quickly, for I will light fires beneath this fallen tree of hers, then I tell thee, the beautiful one shall choose between my rule and doom. Now Noya would hear no more. Dog, she cried, filthy night bird, darest thou speak thus of the Inkosazana? Another word, and I will offer that heart of thine to the son thou hatest. And snatching the spear from Rachel's hand, she charged at him, holding it aloft. Edo saw her come. With a scream of fear he leapt to his feet and ran swiftly along the bowl till he reached the mass of the fallen branches. Into these he sprang, swinging himself from bough to bough like an ape, until he vanished amongst the dark green foliage. Then, having quite lost sight of him, Noya returned, laughing, to Rachel, by whom stood the old mother of the trees, who had slid from her arms, and gave her back the spear, saying in the dwarf language, This Edo speaks great words, but he is also a great coward. Yes, yes, answered the old woman, he is a great coward, because like all our folk he fears the Red Death. But child, I tell thee he is terrible. He hates me because I rule through the white art, not the black. But while my tree stood he must obey me, and I was safe. Now it is down, and he may kill me if he can, according to the custom of my land, and set up another to be queen, she at whose feet my tree bowed itself and fell by the will of the heavens, and whom therefore the people will accept. Through her he will wield all the power of the ghost kings, over whom no man may rule, but a woman only. Come, child, and thou, white one, come also. I know where we may hide. Lady, the power that was mine is thine. Protect me till I die, and in payment I will give thee whatever thy heart desires. I ask no payment. Rachel answered wearily when she understood the words, "and I think that it is I who need protection from that wicked dwarf." Then, guided by Nia, who clung to Rachel's hand, they walked down the bole of the tree and along a great branch, till at length they reached a place whence they could climb to the ground. Before they were clear of the boughs, the dethroned mother, from whose round eyes the tears fell, turned and kissed the bark of one of them, wailing aloud, "Farewell, thou mighty one, under whose shade I, and the queens of my race before me, have dreamed for centuries. Thou art fallen beneath the stroke of heaven, and great was thy fall, and I am fallen with thee. Save me from the red death, O spirit of my tree, that in the land of ghosts I still may sleep beneath thy shade forever." Then she ran to the very point of the tree, and broke off its topmost twig, which was covered with narrow and shining green leaves, and holding it in her hand, returned to Rachel. "I will plant it," she said, "and perchance it will grow to be the house of queens unborn. Come, now come." And she turned her face towards the forest. The thunder had rolled away, and from time to time the sun shone fiercely, so fiercely that, unable to bear its rays, all the dwarfs who were gathered about the fallen tree had retreated into the shadow of the other trees around the open space. There they stood and sat watching the three of them go by. Men, women, and children, they all watched, and Rachel they saluted with their raised hands, but to her who had been their mother for unknown years they did no reverence. Only one hideous little man ran up to her and called out, "Thou didst punish me once, old woman. Now, why should I not kill thee in payment? Thy tree is down at last." Nia looked at him sadly and answered, "I remember. Thou shouldst have died, for thy sin was great, but I laid a lesser burden on thee. Man, thou canst not kill me yet. My tree is down, but it is not dead." She held up the green bough in her hand and looked at him from beneath it, then went on slowly, "Man, my wisdom remains within me, and I tell thee that before I die, thou shalt die, and not as thou desirest. Remember my words, people of the ghosts." Then she walked on with the others, leaving the dwarf staring after her, with a face wherein hate struggled with fear. "Thou liest," he screamed after her. "Thy power is gone with thy tree." Scarcely were the words out of his mouth when they heard a crash which caused them to look round. A bough, broken by the storm, had fallen from on high. It had fallen onto the head of the dwarf, and there he lay, crushed and dead. "Ah!" piped the other dwarfs, pointing towards the corpse with their fingers, and closing their eyes to shut out the sight of blood. "Ah, Nia is right. She still has power. Those who would kill her must wait till her tree dies." Taking no heed of what had happened, Nia walked on into the forest. For a while, Rachel noted the little huts built, each of them, at the foot of a tree. There were hundreds of these huts that they could see, showing that the people were many, but by degrees they grew fewer. Only one was visible here and there, set beneath some particularly vigorous and handsome timber. At last they ceased altogether. They had passed through that city, the strangest city in the world. Trees. Everywhere trees. Hundreds of trees. Tens of thousands of trees, soaring up to heaven, making a canopy of their interlacing boughs, shutting out the light so that beneath them was deep and oppressive gloom. There was silence also, for if any beasts or birds dwelt there, the hurricane had scared them away. Silence, only broken from time to time by the crash of some giant of the forest that, its length of days fulfilled at last, sank suddenly to ruin, to be buried in a tomb of brushwood, whence in due course its successor would arise. "Another life gone," said the old woman Nya, flitting before them like a little gray ghost, every time that this weird sound struck upon their ears. "Whose was it, I wonder? I will look in my bowl. I will look in my bowl." For as Rachel discovered afterwards, these people believed that the spirit of each tree of the forest is attached to the spirit of a human being, although that being may dwell in other lands far away, which dies when the tree dies, sometimes slowly by disease, and sometimes in swift collapse, so that they pass together into the world of ghosts. On they flitted through the gloom, on for mile after mile, although leaf-strewn ground showed no traces of it. Evidently they were following some kind of path, for no fallen trunks barred their progress, nor were there any creepers or brushwood, although to right and left of them all these could be seen in plenty. At last, quite of a sudden, for the bole of a tree at the end of the path had hidden it from them, they came upon a clearing in the forest. It seemed to be natural, or at any rate a very ancient clearing, since in it no stumps were visible, nor any scrub or creepers, only tall grass and flowering plants. In the center of this place, covering a quarter of it perhaps, was a vast circular wall, 50 feet or more in height, and clothed with ferns. This wall, they noted, was built of huge blocks of stone, so huge indeed that it seemed wonderful that they could have been moved by human beings. At the sight of that marvelous wall, Rachel and Noya halted involuntarily, and Noya asked, "Who made it, Mother?" "The giants who lived when the world was young." "Can our hands lift such stones?" Nya answered, as bending down she thrust the top shoot from her fallen tree deep into the humid soil, then added, "O child, there is danger here." As she spoke, something hissed through the air just above her head, and stuck fast in the bark of a sapling. Noya sprang forward and plucked it out. It was a little reed, feathered with grasses, and having a sharp ivory point, smeared with some green substance. "Touch it not," cried Nya. "It is a deadly poison. Edo's work, Edo's work. But my hour is not yet. Into the open before another comes." So they ran forward, all three of them, seeing and hearing nothing of the shooter of the arrow. As they approached the titanic wall, they saw that it enclosed a mound, on the top of which mound grew a cedar-like tree with branches so wide that they seemed to overshadow half of the enclosure. There were no gates to this wall, but while they wondered how it could be entered, Nya led them to a kind of cleft in its stones, not more than 2 feet in width, across which cleft were stretched strings of plaited grass. She pressed herself against them, breaking them, and walked forward, followed by Rachel and Noya. Suddenly they heard a noise above them, and looking up saw white-robed dwarfs, perched upon the stones of the cleft, holding bent bows in their hands, whereof the arrows were pointed at their breasts. Nya halted, beckoning to them, whereon, recognizing her, they dropped the arrows into the little quivers which they wore, and scrambled off, whither Rachel could not see. "These are the guardians of the temple, that cannot either speak or hear, who were summoned by the breaking of the thread," said Nya, and went forward again. Now to the right and now to the left ran the narrow path that wound its way in the thickness of the mighty wall, which towered so high above them that they walked almost in darkness, and at each turn of it were recesses, and above these projecting stones where archers could stand for its defense. At length, this path ended in a cul-de-sac, for in front of them was nothing but blank masonry. Whilst Rachel and Noya stared at it, wondering whither they should go now, a large stone in this wall turned, leaving a narrow doorway, through which they passed, whereon it shut again behind them, though by what machinery they could not see. Thus they passed through the wall, emerging, however, at a different point in its circumference to that at which they had entered. In the center of the enclosure rose the hill of earth that they had seen from without, which evidently was kept free from weeds and swept, and on its crest grew the huge cedar-like tree, the tree of the tribe. Between the base of this hill and the foot of the wall was a wide ring of level ground, also swept and weeded, and on this space, neatly arranged in lines, were hundreds of little hillocks that resembled ant heaps. "The burying place of the ghost priests, lady," said Nia, nodding at the hillocks. "Soon my bones will be added to them." Walking across this strange cemetery, they came to the foot of the mound that was entirely overshadowed by the cedar above, from the outspread limbs of which hung long gray moss that swayed ceaselessly in the wind. Here dwarfs appeared from right and left, the same whom they had seen within the thickness of the wall, or others like to them, some male and some female, melancholy-eyed little creatures who bowed to Nia and looked with fear and wonder at the tall white Rachel. Evidently, they were all of them deaf mutes, for they made signs to Nia, who answered them with other signs, the purport of which seemed to sadden and disturb them greatly. "They have seen the fall of my tree in their bowls," explained Nia to Noya, "and ask me if it is a true vision. I tell them that I am come here to die, and that is why they are sad. This is the place of dying of all the ghost priests, whence they pass into the world of spirits, and here no blood may be shed, no, not that of the most wicked evildoer. If any one of the family of the priests reach this place living, the glory of the White Death is won. Follow and see." So they followed her up the mound, past what looked like the entrance to a cave, until they reached a low fence of reeds, whereof the gate stood open. "The gate is open, but enter not there," whispered the old mother of the trees, "for those who enter there live not long. Look, lady, look." Rachel peered through the gate, but so dense was the gloom in that holy spot that at first she could only see the enormous red bowl of the cedar, and the ghostly moss-clad branches which sprang from it had no great height above the ground. Presently, however, her eyes, grown accustomed to the light, distinguished several little white-robed figures seated upon the earth at some distance from the trunk, staring into vessels of wood which were placed before them. These figures appeared to be those of both men and women, while one was that of a child. Even as they watched, the figure nearest to them fell forward over its bowl and lay quite still, whereon those around it set up a feeble piping cry that yet had in it a note of gladness. The dwarf mutes who had accompanied them, and who alone seemed to have a right of entry into this sad place, ran forward and looked. Then, very gently, they lifted up the fallen figure and bore it out. As it was carried past them, Rachel noted that it was the body of quite a young woman, whose little face, wasted to nothing, still looked sweet and gentle. "Was she ill?" asked Rachel in an awed voice. "Perhaps," answered the mother, shaking her gray head, "or perhaps she was very unhappy and came here to die. What does it matter? She is happy now. Ask her, Noah, if all must die who sit beneath that tree, said Rachel. Aye, answered Nia, all save these dumb people who have been priests of the tree from generation to generation. To touch its stem is to perish soon or late, for it is the tree of life and death, and in it dwells the spirit of the whole race. What then would happen if it fell down, or was destroyed like your tree, mother? Then the race would perish also, answered Nia, since their spirit would lack a home, and depart to the world of ghosts, whither they must follow. When it dies of old age, if it should ever die, then the race will die with it. And if someone should cut it down, mother, what then? Now when Noah translated these words to her, the face of the old queen was filled with horror, and as her face was, so was Noah's face. White maiden, she gasped, speak not such wickedness, lest the very thought of it should bring a curse upon us all. He who destroyed that tree would bring ruin upon this people. They would fly away, every one of them, far into the heart of the forest, and be seen no more by man. Moreover, he who did this evil thing would perish, and pass down to vengeance among the ghosts, such vengeance as may not be spoken. Put that thought from thy mind, I pray thee, and let it never pass thy lips again. Do you believe all this, Noah? Asked Rachel in English with a smile. Yes, Zula, answered Noah, shuddering, for it is true. My father told me of it, and of what happened once to some wild men who broke into the sanctuary and shot arrows at the tree. No, I will not tell the story. It is dreadful. Yet it must be foolishness, Noah, for how can a tree have power over the lives of men? I do not know, but it has. It has. If I were but to cast a stone at it, I should be dead in a day. And so would you. Yes, even you. Nothing could save you. Oh, she went on earnestly, swear to me, sister, that you will never so much as touch that tree. I pray you, swear. So Rachel swore to please her, for she was tired of this tree and its powers. Then they went down the hill again, till they came to the mouth of the cave. Enter, lady, Nia said, for this must be thy home a while, until thou goest to rule as mother of the trees after me, or if it pleases thee better, up yonder to die. They went into the cave, having no choice. It was a great place, lit dimly by the outer light, and farther down its length with lamps. Looking round her, Rachel saw that its roof was supported by white columns, which she knew to be stalactites, for as a child she had seen their like. At the end of it, where the lamps burned and a fountain bubbled from the ground, rose a very large column, shaped like the trunk of a tree, with branches at the top that looked like the boughs of a tree. Gazing at it, Rachel understood why these dwarves, or some ancient people before them, had chosen this cave as their temple. The ghost tree of my race, said old Nia, pointing to it, the only tree that never falls, the tree that lives and grows forever. Yes, it grows, for it is larger now than when my mother was a child. As they drew near to this wondrous and ghostly-looking object, Rachel saw piled around and beyond it many precious things. There was gold in dust in heaps, and rings and nuggets. There were shining stones, red and green and white, that she knew were jewels. There were tusks of ivory, and carvings in ivory. There were karosses and furs mouldering to decay. There were grotesque gods, fetishes of wood and stone. Offerings, said Nia, which all the nations that live in darkness bring to the mother of the trees, and the priests of the cave costly things which they value, but we value them not, who prize power and wisdom only. Yes, yes, costly things, which they give to the mother of the trees, the fools without a spirit, when they come here to ask her oracle. Look, there are some of the gifts which were sent by Dingaan of the Zulus, in payment for the oracle of his death. Thou broughtest them, Noya, my child. Yes, answered Noya, I brought them, and the Nkosazana here, she delivered the oracle. Edo gave her the bowl, and she saw pictures in the bowl, and showed them to Dingaan. Nay, nay, said the old woman testily. It was I who saw the pictures, and I showed them to Edo, and to this white virgin. You cannot understand, but it was so. Edo's gift of vision is small, mine is great. None have ever had it as I have it, and that is why Edo and the others have suffered my tree to live so long, because the light of my wisdom has shone about their heads and spoken through their tongues. And when I am gone, they will seek and find it not. In thee they might have found it, maiden, had thy heart remained empty. But now it is full again, and what room is there for wisdom such as ours? The wisdom of the ghosts, not the wisdom of life and love and beating hearts. Noya translated the words, but Rachel seemed to take no heed of them. Dingaan, she asked, is Dingaan dead? He was well enough when Richard came to Zululand, and since then I have seen nothing of him. How did he die? He did not die, Zula, though I think that ere long he will die, for you told him so. It was you who died for a while, not Dingaan. By and by you shall learn all that story. Now you are very weary and must rest. Yes, said Rachel with a sob, I think I died when Richard died, but now I seem to have come to life again. That is the worst of it. Oh, Noya, Noya, why did you not let me remain dead, instead of bringing me to life again, in this dreadful place? Because it was otherwise fated, sister, replied Noya. No, do not begin to laugh and cry. It was otherwise fated. And bending down, she whispered something into Nia's ear. The old dwarf nodded. Then taking Rachel by the hand, led her to where some skins were spread upon the floor. Lie down, she said, and rest. Rest, beautiful white one, and wake up to eat and be strong again. And she gazed into Rachel's eyes as Edo had done when the fits of wild laughter were on her, singing something as she gazed. While she sang, the madness that was gathering there again went out of Rachel's eyes. The lids closed over them, and presently they were fast shut in sleep, nor did she open them again for many hours. Rachel awoke and sat up, looking round her wonderingly. Then by the dim light of the lamps she saw Noya seated at her side, and the old dwarf woman who was called Mother of the Trees, squatted at a little distance, watching them both, and remembered. Thou hast had happy dreams, lady, and thou art well again, is it not so? Queried Nia. Ay, mother, she answered, too happy, for they make my waking the more sad. And I am well, I who desire to die. Then go up through the open gate, which thou sawest not so long ago, and satisfy thy desire, as it is easy to do, replied Nia grimly. Nay, she added in a changed voice, go not up. Thou art too young and fair. The blood runs too red in those blue veins of thine. What hast thou to do with ghosts and death and the darkness of the trees, thou child of the air and sunshine? Death for the dwarf folk, death for the dealers in dreams, death for the death lovers, but for thee, life, life. Tell her, Noya, said Rachel, that my mother, who was foresighted, always said that I should live out my days, and I fear that it is true, who must live them out alone. Yes, yes, she was right, that mother of thine, answered Nia, and for the rest, who knows? But thou art hungry. Eat. Afterwards we will talk. And she pointed to a stool, upon which was food. Rachel tasted, and found it very good, a kind of porridge, made of she knew not what, and with it forest fruits, but no flesh. So she ate heartily, and Noia ate with her. Nia ate also, but only a very little. Why should I trouble to eat, she said, I to whom death draws near. When they had finished eating, at some signal which Rachel did not perceive, mutes came in, who bore away the fragments of the meal. After they had gone, the 3 women washed themselves in the water of the fountain. Then Noia combed out Rachel's golden hair, and clothed her again in her robe of silken fur that she had cleansed, throwing over it a mantle of snowy white fiber, such as the dwarfs wove into cloth, which she and Nya had made ready while Rachel slept. As Noia put it about her mistress and stepped back to see how it became her beauty, 2 of the dwarf mutes appeared, creeping up the cave, and squatting down before Nia, began to make signs to her. What is it? Asked Rachel nervously. Edo is without, answered the mother, and would speak with us. I fear Edo, and will not go, exclaimed Rachel. Nay, have no fear, maiden, for here he cannot harm thee, or any of us. It is the place of sanctuary. Come, let us see this priest. Perhaps we may learn something from him. Nya led the way down the cave, followed by Rachel and Noia. Squatted in its entrance, so as to be out of reach of the rays of the sun, sat Edo, looking like a malevolent toad, and with him were Hana and some other priests. As Rachel approached, they all rose and saluted, but to Nya and Noia they gave no salute. Only to Nya, Edo said, Why art thou not within the fence, old woman? And he pointed with his chin towards the place of death above. Thy tree is down, and all last night we were hacking off its branches, that it may dry up the sooner. It is time for thee to die. I die when my tree dies, not before, priest, answered Nya. I have still some work to do before I die. Also, I have planted my tree again in good soil, and it may grow. I saw, said Edo. It is without the wall there, but many a generation must go by before a new mother sits beneath its shade. Well, die when it pleases you. It does not matter when, since thou art no more our mother. Moreover, learn that all have deserted thee, save a very few, most of whom have just now passed within the fence above, that they may attend thee amongst the ghosts. I thank them, said Nya simply, and in that world we will rule together. The rest, went on Edo, have turned against thee, having heard how thou didst bring one of us to the Red Death yesterday by thy evil magic, him upon whom the bough fell. Who was it that strove to bring me to the Red Death before I reached the sanctuary? Who shot the poisoned arrow, priest? I do not know, answered Edo, but it seems that he shot badly, for thou art still here. Now, enough of thee, old woman. For many years we bore thy rule, which was always foolish, and sometimes bad, because we could not help it. For the tree of her who went before thee fell at thy feet, as thy tree has fallen at the feet of the White Virgin there. For long thou and I have struggled for the mastery, and now thou art dead, and I have won. So be silent, old woman, and, since that arrow missed thee, go hence in peace, for none need thee any more, who hast neither youth nor comeliness nor power. I answered Nia, stung to fury by these insults, I shall go in peace, but thou shalt not abide in peace, thou traitor, nor those who follow thee. When youth and comeliness fade, then wisdom grows, and wisdom is power, Edo, true power. I tell thee that last night I looked in my bowl, and saw things concerning thee, I, and all of our people, that are hid from thy eyes, terrible things, things that have not befallen since the tree of the tribe was a seed, and the spirit of the tribe came to dwell within it. Speak them then, said Edo, striving to hide the fear which showed through his round eyes. Nay, priest, I speak them not. Live on, and thou shalt discover them, thou and thy traitors. Well have I served you all for many years. Mercy have I given to all. White magic have I practiced, and not black. None have died that I could save. None have suffered whom I could protect. No, not even the slave peoples beneath our rule. All this I have done, knowing that ye plotted against me, knowing that ye strove to kill my tree by spells, knowing what the end must be. It has come at last, as come it must, and I do not grieve. Fool! I knew that it would come, and I knew the manner of its coming. It was I who sent for this virgin queen, whom ye would set up to rule over you, foreseeing that at her feet my tree would fall. The ghost of Siapi, who is of my blood, Siapi, whom years ago ye drove away for no offense to dwell in a strange land, told me of her and of this Noya, his daughter, and of the end of it all. So she came. Thou didst not bring her as thou thoughtest. I brought her, and my tree fell at her feet as it was doomed to fall. And she saved me from the Red Death, as she was doomed to do, giving me love, not hate, as I gave her love, not hate. For the rest ye shall see, all of you. I am finished, I am dead, but I live on elsewhere, and ye shall see. Now Edo would have answered, but the priest Hana, who appeared to be much frightened by Nia's words, plucked at his sleeve, whispering in his ear, and he was silent. Presently he spoke again, but to Rachel, bidding Noya translate. Thou white maid, he said, who wast called princess of the Zulus, pay no heed to this old dotard, but listen to me. When thy spirit wandered yonder, even then I saw the seeds of greatness in thee, and begged thee from the savage Dingaan. Also, I and Pani, who is dead, and Hana, who lives, read by our magic that at thy feet the tree of Nya would fall, and that after her thou wast appointed to rule over us. All the ghost people read it also, and now they have named thee their mother, and chosen thee a tree, a great tree, but young and strong, that shall stand for ages. Come forth then, and take thy seat beneath that tree, and be our queen. Why should I come? Asked Rachel. It seems that you dwarfs bring your queens to ill ends. Choose you another mother. And Kosazana, we cannot, if we would, answered Edo, for these matters are not in our hands, but in those of our spirit. Hearken, we will deal well with thee. We will make thee great, and grow in thy greatness, for thou shalt give us of thy wisdom, that, although thou knowest it not, thou hast above all other women. We weary of little things. We would rule the world. All the nations from sea to sea shall bow down before thee, and seek thine oracle. Thou shalt take their wealth, thou shalt drive them hither and thither, as the wind drives clouds. Thou shalt make war, thou shalt ordain peace. At thy pleasure they shall rise up in life and lie down in death. Their kings shall cower before thee, their princes shall bring thee tribute. thou shalt reign a god. Until it shall please Edo to bring thee to thine end, lady, as it pleases him to bring me to mine, muttered Nia behind her. Be not beguiled, maiden. Remain a woman and uncrowned, for so thou shalt find most joy. Thou meanest, Edo, said Rachel, that thou will rule, and I do thy bidding. Noya, tell him that I will have none of it. When I came here, a great sorrow had made me mad, and I knew nothing. Now I have found my spirit again, and presently I go hence. At this answer, Edo grew very angry. One thing I promise thee, Zula, he said. In the name of all the ghost people, I promise it, that thou shalt not go hence alive. In this sanctuary thou art safe indeed, seated in the shadow of the death tree, that is the tree of life. But soon or late, a way will be found to draw thee hence, and then thou shalt learn who is the stronger, thou or Edo, as the old woman behind thee has learned. Fare thee well for a while. I will tell the people that thou art weary and resteth, and meanwhile I rule in thy name. Fare thee well, Inkosazana, till we meet without the wall. And he rose and went, accompanied by Hana and the other priests. When he had gone a little way, he turned, and pointing up the hill, screamed back to Nia, Go and look within the fence, old hag. There thou wilt see the best of those that clung to thee, seeking for peace. Art thou a coward, that thou lingerest behind them? Nay, Edo, she answered, thou art the coward that hast driven them to death, because they are good, and thou art evil. When my hour is ripe, I join them, not before. Nor shalt thou abide here long behind me. One short day of triumph for thee, Edo, and then night, black night, forever. Edo heard, and his yellow face grew white with rage or fear. He stamped upon the ground, he shook his small fat fists, and spat out curses as a toad spits venom. Nia did not stay to listen to them, but walked up the cave and sat herself down upon her mat. Why does he hate thee so, mother? Asked Rachel. Because those that are bad hate those that are good, maiden. For many a year, Edo has sought to rule through me, and to work evil in the world, but I have not suffered it. He would abandon our secret ancient faith, and reign a king, as Dingaan the Zulu reigns. He would send the slave tribes out to war and conquer the nations, and build him a great house, and have many wives. But I held him fast, so that he could do few of these things. Therefore he plotted against me, but my magic was greater than his, and while my tree stood, he could not prevail. At length it fell at thy feet, as he knew that it was doomed to fall, for all these things are foreordained. And at once he would have slain me by the Red Death, but thou didst protect me, and for that blessed be thou forever. And why does he wish to make me mother in thy place, Nia? Because my tree fell at thy feet, and all the people demand it. Because he thinks that once the bond of the priesthood is tied between you, and his blood runs in thee, thy pure spirit will protect his spirit from its sins, and that thy wisdom, which he sees in thee, will make him greater than any of the ghost people that ever lived. Yet consent not, for afterwards, if thou dost thwart him, he will find a way to bring down thy tree, and with it thy life, and set another to rule in thy place. Consent not, for know that here thou art safe from him. It may be so, mother, but how can I dwell on in this dismal place? Already my heart is broken with its sorrows, and soon, like those poor folk, I should seek peace within the fence. Tell me of those sorrows, said Nia gently. Perhaps I do not know them all, and perhaps I could help thee. So Rachel sat herself down also, and Noah, interpreting for her, told all her tale up to that point, when she saw the body of Richard borne away. For after this she remembered nothing, until she found herself standing upon the fallen tree in the land of the Ghost Kings. It was a long tale, and before ever she finished it, night fell. But throughout its telling, the old dwarf woman said never a word, only watched Rachel's face with her kind, soft eyes. At last it was done, and she said, "A sad story. Truly, there is much evil in the world beyond the country of the trees, for here at least we shed a little blood. Now, maiden, what is thy desire?" "This is my desire," said Rachel, "to be joined again to him I love, whom Ishmael slew, yes, and to my father and mother also, whom the Zulus slew at the command of Ishmael." "If they are all dead, how can that be, maiden, unless thou seekest them in death? Pass within the fence yonder, and let the poison of the tree of the tribe fall upon thee, and soon thou wilt find them." "Nay, mother, I may not, for it would be self-murder, and my faith knows few greater crimes." "Then thou must wait till death finds thee, and that road may be very long." "Already it is long, mother, so long that I know not how to travel it, who am alone in the world, without a friend save Noah here." And she began to weep. "Not so. Thou hast another friend." And she laid her hand upon Rachel's heart. "Though it is true that I may bide with thee but a little while." After this they were all silent for a space, until Nia looked up at Rachel and asked suddenly, "Art thou brave?" "The Zulus and others thought so, mother. But what can courage avail me now?" "Courage of the body, nothing, maiden. Courage of the spirit, much, perhaps. If thou sawest this lover of thine, and knew for certain that he lives on beneath the world awaiting thee, would it bring thee comfort?" Rachel's breast heaved, and her eyes sparkled with joy as she answered, "Comfort? What is there that could bring so much? But how can it be, mother, seeing that the last gulf divides us, a gulf which mortals may not pass and live?" "Thou sayest it, still, I have great power, and thy spirit is white and clean. Perhaps I could dispatch it across that gulf, and call it back to earth again. Yet there are dangers to me of which I reck little, and dangers to thee. Whither I send thee, there thou mightest bide." "I care not if I bide there, mother, if only it be with him. Oh, send me on this journey to his side, and living or dead, I will bless thee." Now Nia thought a while and answered, "For thy sake I will try what I would try for none other who has breathed or breathes, for thou didst save me from the Red Death at the hands of Edo. Yes, I will try, but not yet. First thou must eat and rest. Obey, or I do nothing." So Rachel ate, and afterwards, feeling drowsy, even slept a while, perhaps because she was still weary with her journeying, and her new-found mind needed repose, or perhaps because some drug had been mingled with her drink. When she awoke, Nia led her to the mouth of the cave. Here they stood a while, studying the stars. No breath of air stirred, and the silence was intense. Only, from time to time, the sound of trees falling in the forest reached their ears. Sometimes it was quite soft, as though a fleece of wool had been dropped to the earth. That was when the tree that died had grown miles and miles away from them, and sometimes the crash was as that of a sudden thunder. That was when the tree which died had grown near to them. A sense of the mystery and wonder of the place and hour sank into Rachel's heart. The stars above, the mighty entombing forest, in which the trees fell unceasingly after their long centuries of life, the encircling wall, built perhaps by hands that had ceased from their labors hundreds of thousands of years before those trees began to grow. The huge moss-clad cedar upon the mound, beneath the shadow of whose branches, day by day, its worshippers gave up their breath, that immemorial cedar whereof, as they believed, the life was the life of the nation, the wizened little witch-woman at her side, with the seal of doom already set upon her brow, and the stare of farewell in her eyes, the sad spiritual face of Noya, who held her hand, the loving, faithful Noya, who in that light seemed half a thing of air, the gray little dwarf mutes, who squatted on their mats, staring at the ground, or now and again passed down the hill from the fence of death above, bearing between them a body to its burial. All were mysterious, all were wonderful. As she looked and listened, a new strength stirred in Rachel's heart. At first she had felt afraid, but now courage flowed into her, and it seemed to come from the old woman at her side, the mistress of mysteries, the mother of magic, in whom was gathered the wisdom of 100 generations of this half-human race. "Look at the stars and the night," she was saying in her soft voice, "for soon thou shalt be beyond them all, and perchance thou shalt never see them more. Art thou fearful? If so, speak, and we will not try this journey in search of one whom we may not find." "No," answered Rachel, "but mother, whither go we?" "We go to the land of death. Come then, the moment is at hand. It is hard on midnight. See, yonder star stands above the holy tree." And she pointed to a bright orb that hung almost over the topmost bough of the cedar. "It marks thy road, and if thou wouldst pass it, now is the hour." "Mother," asked Noya, "may I come with her? I also have my dead, and where my sister goes, I follow." "Aye, if thou wilt, daughter of Siapi. The path is wide enough for 3, and if I stay on high, perchance thou, that art of my blood, mayest find strength to guide her earthwards through the wandering worlds." Then Nia walked up the cave and sat herself down within the circle of the lamps, with her back to the stalactite that was shaped like a tree, bidding Rachel and Noya be seated in front of her. 2 of the dwarf mutes appeared, women both of them, and squatted to the right and left, each gazing into a bowl of limpid dew. Nia made a sign, and still gazing into their bowls, these dwarfs began to beat upon little drums that gave out a curious rolling noise, while Nia sang to the sound of the drums a wild, low song. With her thin little hands, she grasped the right hand of Rachel and of Noya, and gazed into their eyes. Things changed to Rachel. The dwarfs to right and left vanished away, but the low murmuring of their drums grew to a mighty music, and the stars danced to it. The song of Nia swelled and swelled till it filled all the space between earth and heaven. It was the rush of the gale among the forests. It was the beating of the sea upon an illimitable coast. It was the shout of all the armies of the world. It was the weeping of all the women of the world. It lessened again. She seemed to be passing away from it. She heard it far beneath her. It grew tiny in its volume, tiny, as if it were an infinite speck or point of sound, which she could still discern for millions and millions of miles, till at length distance and vastness overcame it, and it ceased. It ceased, this song of the earth, but a new song began, the song of the rushing worlds. Far away she could hear it, that ineffable music, far in the utter depths of space. Nearer it would come, and nearer, a ringing, glorious sound, a sound and yet a voice, one mighty voice that sang and was answered by other voices as sun crossed the path of sun and caught up and re-echoed by the innumerable choir of the constellations. They were falling past her, those vast glowing suns, those rounded planets that were now vivid with light and now steeped in gloom, those infinite showers of distant stars. They were gone, they and their music together. She was far beyond them, in a region where all life was forgotten, beyond the rush of the uttermost comet, beyond the last glimmer of the spies and outposts of the universe. One shape of light she sped into the black bosom of fathomless space, and its solitude shriveled up her soul. She could not endure. She longed for some shore on which to set her mortal feet. Behold, far away a shore appeared, a towering, cliff-bound shore, upon whose iron coasts all the black waves of space beat vainly and were eternally rolled back. Here there was light, but no such light as she had ever known. It did not fall from sun or star, but changeful and radiant, welled upward from that land in 1,000 hues, as light might well from a world of opal. In its dazzling, beautiful rays, she saw fantastic palaces and pyramids. She saw seas and pure white mountains. She saw plains and new-hued flowers. She saw gulfs and precipices and pale lakes pregnant with wavering flame. All that she had ever conceived of as lovely or as fearful she beheld, far lovelier or 1,000-fold more fearful. Like a great rose of glory, that world bloomed and changed beneath her. Petal by petal, its splendors fell away and were swallowed in the sea of space, whilst from the deep heart of the immortal rose, new splendors took their birth, and fresh-fashioned, mysterious, wonderful, reappeared. The measureless city, with its columns, its towers, and its glittering gates. It endured a moment, or 1,000,000 years, she knew not which, and lo, where it had been, stood another city, different, utterly different, only 100 times more glorious. Out of the prodigal heart of the world rose, were they created. Into the black bosom of nothingness were they gathered, whilst others, ever more perfect, pressed into their place. So too changed the mountains, and so the trees, while the gulfs became a garden, and the fiery lakes a pleasant stream, and from the seed of the strange flowers grew immemorial forests, wreathed about with rosy mists, and bedecked in glimmering dew. With music they were born, on the wings of music they fled away, and after them that sweet music wailed like memories. A hand took hers, and drew her downwards, and up to meet her leapt myriads of points of light, in every point a tiny face. They gazed at her with their golden eyes. They whispered together concerning her, and the sound of their whispering was the sound of a sea at peace. They accompanied her to the very heart of the opal rose of life, whence all these wonders welled. They set her in a great grey hall, roofed in with leaning cliffs, and there they left her desolate. Fear came upon her. The loneliness choked her. It held her by the throat like a thing alive. She seemed about to die of it, when she became aware that once more she was companioned. Shapes stood about her. She could not see the shapes, save dimly now and again as they moved, but their eyes she could see, their great, calm, pitiful eyes, which looked down on her, as the eyes of a giant might look down upon a babe. They were terrible, but she did not fear them so much as the loneliness, for at least they lived. One of the shapes bent over her, for its holy eyes drew near to her, and she heard a voice in her heart, asking her for what great cause she had dared to journey hither before the time. She answered in her heart, not with her lips, that she was bereaved of all she loved and came to seek them. Then, still in her heart, she heard that voice command, "Let all this Rachel's dead be brought before her." Instantly doors swung open at the end of that gray hall, and through them, with noiseless steps, with shadowy wings, floated a being that bore in its arms a child. Before her it stayed, and the light of its starry head illumined the face of the child. She knew it at once. It was that baby brother whose bones lay by the shore of the African sea. It awoke from its sleep, it opened its eyes, it stretched out its arms and smiled at her. Then it was gone. Other shapes appeared, each of them bearing its burden. A companion who had died at school, friends of her youth and childhood whom she had thought yet living, a young man who had once wished to marry her and who was drowned, the soldier whom she had killed to save the life of Noya. At the sight of him she shrank, for his blood was on her hands, but he only smiled like the rest and was borne away, to be followed by that witch doctoress whom the Zulus had slain because of her, who neither smiled nor frowned, but passed like one who wonders. Then another shadow swept down the hall, and in its arms her mother with joyful eyes, who held thin hands above her, as though in blessing, and to whom she strove to speak, but strove in vain. She was borne on, still blessing her, and where she had been was her father, who blessed her also, and whose presence seemed to shed peace upon her soul. He pointed upwards and was gone, gazing at her earnestly, and lo, a form of darkness cast something at her feet. It was Ishmael, who knelt before her. Ishmael, whose tormented face gazed up at her as though imploring pardon. A struggle rent her heart. Could she forgive? Oh, could she forgive him who had slain them all? Now she was aware that the place was filled with the points of light that were spirits, and every one of them looked at her, awaiting the free verdict of her heart. Rank upon rank, also, the mighty shapes gathered about her, and in their arms her dead, and all of them looked and looked, awaiting the free verdict of her heart. Then it arose within her, drawn how she knew not, from every fiber of her infinite being, it arose within her, that spirit of pity and of pardon. As the dead had stretched out their arms above her, so she stretched out her arms over the head of that tortured soul, and for the first time her lips were given the power to speak. "As I hope for pardon, so I pardon," she said. "Go in peace." Voices and trumpets caught up the words, and through the gray hall they rang and echoed, proclaimed forever. And as they died away, he too was gone, and with him went the myriad points of flame, in each of which gleamed a tiny face. She looked about her, seeking another spirit, that spirit she had traveled so far and dared so much to find, but there came only a little dwarf that shambled alone down the great hall. She knew him at once for Pani, the priest, he who had been crushed in the tempest, Pani, the brother of Edo. No shape bore him, for he who on earth had been half a ghost could walk this ghost world on his mortal feet, or so her mind conceived. Past her he shuffled, shamefaced, and was gone. Now the great doors at the end of the hall closed. From far away she could see them roll together like lightning severed clouds, and once more that awful loneliness overcame her. Her knees gave way beneath her, she sank down upon the floor, one little spot of white in its expanse, wishing that the roof of rock would fall and hide her. She covered her face with her golden hair and wept behind its veil. She looked up and saw two great eyes gazing at her. No face, only two great steady eyes. Then a voice, speaking in her heart, asked her why she wept, whose desire had been fulfilled, and she answered that it was because she could not find him whom she sought, Richard Darrien. Instantly the tongues and trumpets took up the name. "Richard Darrien," they cried, "Richard Darrien." But no shape swept in bearing the spirit of Richard in its arms. "He is not here," said the voice in her heart. "Go, seek him in some other world." She grew angry. "Thou mockest me," she answered. "He is dead, and this is the home of the dead. Therefore he must be here. Shadow, thou mockest me." "I mock not," came the swift answer. "Mortal, look now and learn." Again the doors burst open, and through them poured the infinite rout of the dead. That hall would not hold them all. Therefore it grew and grew till her sight could scarcely reach from wall to wall. Shapes headed and marshaled them by races and by generations, perhaps because thus only could her human heart imagine them. But now none were born in their arms. They came in myriads and in millions, in billions and tens of billions. Men and women and children, kings and priests and beggars, all wearing the garments of their age and country. They came like an ocean tide, and their floating hair was the foam on the tide, and their eyes gleamed like the first shimmer of dawn above the snows. They came for hours and days and years and centuries. They came eternally, and as they came, every finger of that host, compared to which all the sands of all the seas were but as a handful, was pointed at her, and every mouth shaped the words, "Is it I whom thou seekest?" Million by million she scanned them all, but the face of Richard Darrien was not there. Now the dead Zulus were marching by. Down the stream of time they marched in their marshaled regiments. Chaka stood over her. She knew him by his likeness to Dingaan, and threatened her with a little red-handled spear, asking her how she dared to sit upon the throne of the spirit of his nation. She began to tell him her story, but as she spoke, the wide receding walls of that grey hall fell apart and crumbled, and amidst a mighty laughter, the great-eyed shapes rebuilt them to the fashion of the cave in the mound beneath the tree of the dwarf folk. The sound of the trumpets died away. The shrill, sweet music of the spheres grew far and faint. Rachel opened her eyes. There in front of her sat Nia, crooning her low song, and there on either side crouched the mutes, tapping upon their little drums and gazing into their bowls of water, while against her leaned Noya, who stirred like one awakening from sleep. Ages and ages ago, when she started on that dread journey, the dwarf to her left was stretching out her hand to steady the bowl at her feet, and now it had but just reached the bowl. A great moth had singed its wings in the lamp, and was fluttering to the ground. It was still in midair. Noya was placing her arm about her neck, and it had but begun to fall upon her shoulder. Nia ceased her singing, and the dwarf women their beating on the drums. "Hast thou been a journey, maiden?" she asked, looking at Rachel curiously. "Aye, mother," she answered in a faint voice, "and a journey far and strange. And thou, Noya, my niece?" "Aye, mother," she answered, shivering, as though with cold or fear. "But I went not with my sister here. I went alone, for years and years. A far journey, thou sayest, in Nkosazana, and one that was for years and years, thou sayest, Noya. Yet the eyes of both of you have been shut for so long only as it takes a burnt moth to fall from the lamp flame to the ground. I think that you slept and dreamt a moment, that is all." "Mayhap, mother," replied Rachel, "but if so, mine was a most wondrous dream, such as has never visited me before, and as I pray, never may again, for I was borne beyond the stars, into the glorious cities of the dead, and I saw all the dead, and those that I had known in life were brought to me by shapes and powers, whereof I could only see the eyes. And didst thou find him whom thou soughtest most of all?" "Nay," she answered, "him alone I did not find. I sought him. I prayed the guardians of the dead to show him to me, and they called up all the dead, and I scanned them, every one, and they summoned him by his name, but he was not of their number, and he came not. Only they spoke in my heart, bidding me to look for him in some other world." "Ah," exclaimed Nya, starting a little. "They said that to thee, did they? Well, worlds are many, and such a search would be long." Then, as though to turn the subject, she added, "And what sawest thou, Noya?" "I, mother? I went not beyond the stars. I climbed down endless ladders into the center of the earth. My feet are still sore with them. I reached vast caves full of a blackness that shone, and there many dead folk were walking, going nowhere, and coming back from nowhere. They seemed strengthless, but not unhappy, and they looked at me and asked me tidings of the upper world, but I could not answer them, for whenever I opened my lips to speak, a cold hand was laid upon my mouth. I wandered among them for many moons, only there was no moon, nothing but the blackness that shone like polished coal, wandered from cave to cave. At length I came to a cave in which sat my father, Sayapi, and near to him my mother, and my other mothers, his wives, and my brothers and sisters, all of whom the Zulus killed, as the wild beast Ibubesi told them to do. I saw Ibubesi, and he prayed me for my pardon, and I granted it to him," broke in Rachel. "I did not see him," went on Noya fiercely, "nor would I have pardoned him if I had, nor do I think that my father and his family pardon him. I think that they will wait to bear testimony against him before the Lord of the dead." "Did Sayapi tell you so?" asked Rachel. "Nay, he sat there beneath a black tree, whereof I could not see the top, and gazed into a bowl of black water, and in that bowl he showed me many pictures of things that have been and things that are to come, but they are secret. I may say nothing of them." "And what was the end of it, my niece?" asked Nya, bending forward eagerly. "Mother, the end of it was that the black tree, which was shaped like the tree of our tribe above us, took fire and went up in a fierce flame. Then the roofs of the caves fell in, and all the people of the dwarfs flew through the roofs, singing and rejoicing, into a place of light. Only," she added slowly, "it seemed to me that I was left alone amidst the ruins of the caves, I and the white ghost of the trees. Then a voice cried to me to make my heart bold, to bear all things with patience, since to those who dare much for love's sake, much will be forgiven. So I woke, but what those words mean I cannot guess, seeing that I love no man and never shall." And she rested her chin upon her hand and sat there musing. "No," replied Nya, "thou lovest no man, and therefore the riddle is hard." But as she spoke, her eyes fell upon Rachel. "Mother," said Rachel presently, "my heart is the hungrier for all that it has fed upon. Can thy magic send me back to that country of the dead, that I may search for him again? If so, for his sake, I will dare the journey." "Not so," answered Nya, shaking her head. "It is a road that very few have traveled, and none may travel twice and live." Now Rachel began to weep. Weep not, maiden. There are other roads, and perchance tomorrow thou shalt walk them. Now lie down and sleep, both of you, and fear no dreams. So they laid themselves down and slept, but the old witch-wife Nia sat waiting and watched them. I think I understand, she murmured to herself as she gazed at the slumbering Rachel. For to her who is so pure and good, and who has suffered such cruel wrong, the guardians would not lie. I think that I understand, and that I can find a path. Sleep on, sweet maiden, sleep on in hope. Then she looked at Noya and shook her gray head. I do not understand, she muttered. The black tree, shaped like the tree of our tribe, and Siapi of the old blood seated beneath it. The tree that went up in fire, and the maid of the old blood left alone with the ghost of it while the dwarf people fled into the light and freedom. What does it mean? Ah, that picture in the bowl. Now I can guess. Those who dare much for love. It did not say, for love of man, and woman can love woman. But would she dare a deed that none of our race could even dream? Well, the Zulu blood is bold. Perhaps. O Edo, thou black sorcerer, whither art thou leading the children of the tree? On thy head be it, Edo, not on mine, on thy head forever and forever. When Rachel awoke, refreshed, on the following day, she lay on a while, thinking. Every detail of her vision was perfectly clear in her mind. Only now she was sure that it had been but a dream. Yet what a wonderful dream! How even in her sleep had she found the imagination to conceive circumstances so inconceivable. That magic rush beyond the stars, that mighty world set round with black cliffs against which rolled the waves of space, that changeful, wondrous world which unfolded itself petal by petal like a rose, every petal lovelier and different from the last, that gray hall roofed with tilted precipices, and then those dead, those multitudes of the dead. What power had been born in her that she could imagine such things as these? Vision she had, like her mother, but not after this sort. Perhaps it was but an aftermath of her madness, for into the minds of the mad creep strange sights and sounds, and this place, and the people amongst whom she sojourned, the ghost people, the grey dwarf people, the dealers in dreams, the dwellers in the sombre forest, might well open new doors in such a soul as hers. Or perhaps she was still mad. She did not know. She did not greatly care. All she knew was that her poor heart ached with love for a man who was dead, and yet whom she could not find even among the dead. She had wished to die, but now she longed for death no more, fearing lest, after all, there should be something in that vision which the magic of Nia had summoned up, and that when she reached the further shore she might not find him who dwelt in a different world. Oh, if only she could find him! Then she would be glad enough to go wherever it was that he had gone. Now Noya was awake at her side, and they talked together. "We must have dreamed dreams, Noya," she said. "Perhaps the mother mingled some drug with our food." "I do not know, Zula," answered Noya, "but if so, I want no more of those dreams which bode no good to me. Besides, who can tell what is dream and what is truth? Mayhap this world is the dream, and the truth is such things as we saw last night," and she would say no more on the matter. Nothing happened within the wall that day, that is, nothing out of the common. A certain number of the privileged priestly caste of the dwarfs were carried or conducted into the holy place and up to the fence of death, that they might die there, and a certain number were brought out for burial. Some of those who came in were folk weary of life, or in other words, suicides. And these walked, and some were sick of various diseases, and these were carried. But the end was the same. They always died, though whether this result was really brought about by some poison distilled from the tree, as Nya alleged, or whether it was the effect of a physical collapse induced by that inherited belief, Rachel never discovered. At least they died, some almost at once, and some within a day or two of entering that deadly shade, and were borne away to burial by the mutes who spent their spare time in the digging of little graves which they must fill. Indeed, these mutes neither knew or pretended that they knew who would be the occupant of each grave. At least they intimated by signs that this was revealed to them in their bowls, and when the victims appeared within the wall, took pleasure in leading them to the holes they had prepared, and showing to them with what care these had been dug to suit their stature. For this service they received a fee that such moribund persons brought with them, either of finely woven robes, or of mats, or of different sorts of food, or sometimes of gold and copper rings manufactured by the Unkulu, or other subject savages, which they wore upon their wrists and ankles. Certain of these doomed folk, however, went to their fate with no light hearts, which was not wonderful, as it seemed that these were neither ill nor sought a voluntary euthanasia. They were political victims sent thither by Edo as an alternative to the terror of the Red Death, whereby, according to their strange and ancient creed, they would have risked the spilling of their souls. For the most part, the crime of these poor people was that they had been adherents and supporters of the old mother of the trees, Nya, over whom Edo was at last triumphant. On their way up to the fence, such individuals would stop to exchange a last few sad words with their dethroned priestess. Then, without any resistance, they went on with the rest, but from them the mutes received scant offerings, or none at all, with the result that they were cast into the worst situated and most inconvenient graves, or even tumbled 2 or 3 together into some shapeless corner hole. But after all, that mattered nothing to them, so long as they received sepulchres within the wall, which was their birth, or rather their death right. The priest mutes themselves were a strange folk, and oddly enough, Rachel observed, by comparison, quite cheerful in their demeanor, for when off duty they would smile and gibber at each other like monkeys, and carry on a kind of market between themselves. They lived in that part of the circumference of the wall which was behind the hill, whereon grew the sacred tree. Here no burials took place, and instead of graves appeared their tiny huts, arranged in neat streets and squares. In these they and their forefathers had dwelt from time immemorial. Indeed, each little hut, with a few yards of fenced-in ground about it, ornamented with dwarf trees, was a freehold that descended from father to son. For the mutes married, and were given in marriage, like other folk, though their children were few, and a family of 3 being considered very large, while many of the couples had none at all. But those who were born to them were all deaf mutes, although their other senses seemed to be singularly acute. These mutes had their virtues. Thus some of them were very kind to each other, and especially to those from the outer forest world who came hither to bid farewell to that world, and others, renouncing marriage and all earthly joys, devoted their lives, which appeared to be long, to the worship of the spirit of the tree. Also they had their vices, such as theft, and the seducing away of the betrothed of others. But the chief of them was jealousy, which sometimes led to murder by poisoning, an art whereof they were great masters. When such a crime was discovered, and a case of it happened during the first days of Rachel's sojourn among them, the accused was put upon his trial before the chief of the mutes, evidence for and against him being given by signs which they all understood. Then if a case were established against him, he was forced to drink a bowl of medicine. If he did this with impunity, he was acquitted. But if it disagreed with him, his guilt was held to be established. Now came the strange part of the matter. All his life the evildoer had been accustomed to go within the fence about his business and take no harm. But after such a condemnation, he was conducted there with the usual ceremonies and very shortly perished, like any other uninitiated person. Whether this issue was due to magic, or to mental collapse, or to the previous administration of poison, no one seemed to know, not even Nia herself. So at least she declared to Rachel. At each new moon, these mutes celebrated what Rachel was informed they looked upon as a festival. That is, they climbed the tree of the tribe and scattered themselves among its enormous branches, where for several hours they mumbled and gibbered in the dark like a troop of baboons. Then they came down, and mounting the huge surrounding wall, crept around its circumference. Occasionally this journey resulted in an accident, as one of them would fall from the wall and be dashed to pieces. Although it was noticed that the unfortunate was generally a person who, although guilty of no actual crime, chanced to be out of favor with the other priests and priestesses. After the circuit of the wall had been accomplished, with or without accidents, the dwarfs feasted around a fire, drinking some spirit that threw them into a sleep in which wonderful visions appeared to them. Such was their only entertainment, if so it could be called, since doubtless the ceremony was of a religious character. For the rest, they seldom if ever left the holy place, which was known as within the wall, most of them never doing so in the course of a long life. Beyond the burial of the dead, they did no work, as their food was brought to them daily by outside people who were called the slaves of the wall. Their only method of conversation was by signs, and they seemed to desire no other. Indeed, if, as occasionally happened, a child was born to any of them who could hear or speak like other human beings, it was either given over to the other dwarfs, or if the discovery was not made until it was old enough to observe, it was sacrificed by being bound to the trunk of the tribal tree, lest it should tell the secret of the trees. Such were the weird, half-human folk among whom Rachel was destined to dwell. The Zulus had been bad and bloodthirsty, but compared to these little wizards, they seemed to her as angels. The Zulus, at any rate, had left her thoughts, but these stunted wretches, she was sure, pried into them, and read them with the help of their bowls, for often she caught sight of them signing to each other about her as she passed, and pointing with grins to pictures which they saw in the water. It was night again, still silent night, made odorous with the heavy cedar scents of the huge tree upon the mound. Rachel and Noia sat before Nia in the cave beneath the burning lamp, about which fluttered the big-winged gilded moths. "Thou didst not find him yonder among the shades," said Nia suddenly, as though she were continuing a conversation. "Say now, maiden, art thou satisfied, or wouldst thou seek for him again?" "I would seek him through all the heavens and all the earths. Mother, my soul burns for a sight of him, and if I cannot find him, then I must die, and go perchance where he is not." "Good," said Nia. "The effort wearies me, for I grow weak, yet for thy sake I will try to help thee, who saved me from the Red Death." Then the dwarf women came in and beat upon their drums, and as before, the old mother of the trees began to sing, but Noya sat aside, for in this night's play she would take no part. Again Rachel sank into sleep, and again it seemed to her that she was swept from the earth into the region of the stars, and there searched world after world. She saw many strange and marvelous things so wonderful that her memory was buried beneath the mass of them, so that when she woke again, she could not recall their details. Only of Richard she saw nothing. Yet as her life returned to her, it seemed to Rachel that for one brief moment she was near to Richard. She could not see him, and she could not hear him, yet certainly he was near her. Then her eyes opened, and Nia, ceasing from her song, asked, "What tidings, wanderer?" "Little," she answered feebly, for she was very tired, and in a faint voice she told her all. "Good," said Nia, nodding her grey head. "This time he was not so far away. Tomorrow I will make thy spirit strong, and then perhaps he will come to thee. Now rest." So, next night, Nia laid her charm upon Rachel as before, and again her spirit sought for Richard. This time it seemed to her that she did not leave the earth, but with infinite pain, with terrible struggling, wandered to and fro about it, bewildered by a multitude of faces, led astray by myriads of footsteps. Yet in the end she found him. She heard him not, she saw him not, she knew not where he was, but undoubtedly, for a while, she was with him, and woke again, exhausted, but very happy. Nia heard her story, weighing every word of it, but saying nothing. Then she signed to the dwarfs to bring her a bowl of dew, and stared in it for a long while. The dwarf women also stared into their bowls, and afterwards came to her, talking to her on their fingers, after which all three of them upset the dew upon a rock, breaking the pictures. "Hast thou seen aught?" asked Rachel eagerly. "Yes, maiden," answered the mother. "I and these wise women have seen something, the same thing, and therefore a true thing. But ask not what it was, for we may not tell thee, nor would it help thee if we did. Only be of good courage, for this I say, there is hope for thee." So Rachel went to sleep, pondering on these words, of which neither she nor Noya could guess the meaning. The next night, when she prayed Nia to lay the spell upon her, the old mother would not. "Not so," she said. "Thrice have I rent thy soul from thy body and sent it afar, and this I may do no more, and keep thee living. Nor could I if I would, for I grow feeble. Neither is it necessary, seeing that, although thou knowest it not, that spirit of thine, having found him, is with him wherever he may be, yes, at his side, comforting him." "Aye, but where is he, mother? Let me look in the bowl and see his face, as I believe that thou hast done." "Look if thou wilt," and she motioned to one of the dwarf women to place a bowl before her. So Rachel looked long and earnestly, but saw nothing of Richard, only many fantastic pictures, most of which she knew again, for scenes from her own past. At length, worn out, she thrust away the bowl and asked in a bitter voice why they mocked her, and how it came about that she who had seen the coming of Richard in the pool in Zululand, and the fate of Dingaan the king in the bowl of Edo, could now see nothing of any worth. "As regards the vision of the pool, I cannot say, maiden," replied Nia, "for that was born of thine own heart and had nothing to do with our magic. As regards the visions in the bowl of Edo, they were his visions, not thine, or rather my visions that I saw before he started hence. I passed them on to him, and he passed them on to thee, and thou didst pass them on to King Dingaan. far-sighted and pure-souled as thou art, yet, not having been instructed in their wizardry, thou wilt see nothing in the bowls of the dwarfs, unless their blood is mingled with thy blood. Their blood mingled with my blood? What dost thou mean, mother? What I say, neither more nor less. If Edo has his will, then wilt rule after me here as mother of the trees. But first thy veins must be opened, and the veins of Edo must be opened, and Edo's blood must be poured into thee, and thy blood into him. Then thou wilt be able to read in the bowls as we can, and Edo will be thy master, and thou must do his bidding while you both shall live. If so, answered Rachel, I think that neither of us will live long. That night, Rachel felt too exhausted to sleep, although why this should be she could not guess, as she had done nothing all day save watch the mutes at their dreary tasks, and it was strange, therefore, that she should feel as though she had made a long journey upon her feet. About an hour before the dawn, she saw Nia rise and glide past her towards the mouth of the cave, carrying in her hand a little drum, like those used by the mute women. Something impelled her to follow, and waking Noya at her side, she bade her come also. Outside of the cave, by the faint starlight, they saw the little shape of Nia creeping down the mound, and thence across the open space, towards the wall, and went after her, thinking that she intended to pass the wall. But this she did not do, for when she came to its foot, Nia, notwithstanding her feebleness, began to climb the rough stones as actively as any cat, and though their ascent seemed perilous enough, reached the crest of the wall 60 feet above in safety, and there sat herself down. Next they heard her beating upon the drum she bore, single strokes always, but some of them slow, and some rapid, with a pause between every 5 or 10 strokes, as though she were spelling out words, thought Rachel. After a while, Nia ceased her beating, and in the utter silence of the night, which was broken only, as always, by the occasional crash of the falling trees, for no breath of air stirred, and all the beasts of prey had sought their lairs before light came. Both she and Noya seemed to hear far, infinitely far away, the faint beat of an answering drum. It would appear that Nia heard it also, for she struck a single note upon hers, as though in acknowledgment, after which the distant beating went on, paused as though for a reply from some other unheard drum, and again, from time to time, went on, perhaps repeating that reply. For a long while this continued, until the sky began to grow gray indeed, when Nia beat for several minutes and was answered by a single, far-off note. Then, glancing at the heavens, she prepared to descend the wall, while Rachel and Noya slipped back to the cave and feigned to be asleep. Soon she entered and stood over them, shaking her gray head and asking how it came about that they thought that she, the mother of the trees, should be so easily deceived. So thou sawest us, said Rachel, trying not to look ashamed. No, I saw you not with my eyes, either of you, but I felt both of you following me, and heard in my heart what you were whispering to each other. Well, Inkosazana, art thou the wiser for this journey? No, mother, but tell us, if thou wilt, what thou wast beating on that drum. Gladly, she answered, I was sending certain orders to the slave peoples who still know me as Mother of the Trees, and obey my words. Perhaps thou dost not believe that while I sat upon yonder wall, I talked across the desert to the chiefs of the marches upon the far border of the land of the Mkulu, and that by now, at my bidding, they have sent out men upon an errand of mine. What was the errand, mother? Asked Rachel curiously. I said the errand was mine, not thine, maiden. It is not pressing, but as I do not know how long my strength will last, I thought it well that it should be settled. Then, without more words, she coiled herself up on her mat and seemed to go to sleep. It was after this incident of the drums that Rachel experienced the strangest days, or rather weeks of her life. Nia sent her into no more trances, and to all outward seeming nothing happened. Yet within her much did happen. Her madness had utterly left her, and still she was not as other women are, or as she herself had been in health. Her mind seemed to wander, and she knew not whither it wandered, yet for long hours. Although she was awake, and so Noya said, talking or eating or walking as usual, it was away from her, and afterwards she could remember nothing. Also this happened at night as well as during the day, and ever more and more often. She could remember nothing, yet out of this nothingness there grew upon her a continual sense of the presence of Richard Darrien, a presence that seemed to come nearer and nearer, closer and closer to her heart. It was the assurance of this presence that made those long days so happy to her, though when she was herself, she felt that it could be naught but a dream. Yet, why should a dream move her so strangely, and why should a dream weary her so much? Why, after sleeping all night, should she awake feeling as though she had journeyed all night? Why should her limbs ache, and she grow thin like one who travels without cease? Why should she seem, time after time, to have passed great dangers, to have known cold and heat and want, and struggle against the waters and the battling against storms? Why should her knowledge of this Richard, of the very heart and soul of Richard, grow ever deeper till it was as though they were not twain, but one? She could not answer these questions, and Noya could not answer them, and when she asked Nia, the old mother shook her head and could not or would not answer. Only the dwarf mutes seemed to know the answer, for when she passed them, they nudged each other and grinned and thrust their little woolly heads together, staring, several of them, into one bowl. But if Noya and Nia knew nothing of the cause of these things, the effect of them stirred them both, for they saw that Rachel, the tall and strong, grew faint and weak, and began to fade away, as one fades upon whom deathly sickness has laid its hand. Thus 3 weeks or so went by, until one day, in some fashion of her own, Nia caused to arise in the mind of Edo a knowledge of her desire to speak with him. Early the next morning, Edo arrived at the holy place, accompanied only by his familiar, Hana, and Nia met them alone in the mouth of the cave. "I see that thou art very white and thin, but still alive, old woman," sneered Edo, adding, "All the thousands of the people yonder thought that long ere this thou wouldst have passed within the fence. May I take back that good tidings to them?" The ancient mother of the trees looked at him sternly. "It is true, thou evil mocker," she said, "that I am white and thin. It is true that I grow like to the skeleton of a rotted leaf, all ribs and netted veins, without substance. It is true that my round eyes start from my head like to those of a bush plover, or the tree lizard, and that soon I must pass within the fence, as thou hast so long desired that I should do, that thou mayest reign alone over the thousands of the people of the dwarfs, and wield their wisdom to increase thy power. Thou poison-bloated toad. All these things are true, Edo. Yet ere I go, I have a word to say to thee, to which thou wilt do well to listen." "Speak on," said Edo. "Without doubt thou hast wisdom of a sort. Honey thou hast garnered during many years, and it is well that I should suck the store before it is too late." "Edo," said Nia. I am not the only one in this holy place who grows white and thin. Look, there is another. And she nodded towards Rachel, who walked past them aimlessly, with dreaming eyes, attended by Noia, upon whose arm she leant. I see, answered Edo. This haunted death prison presses the life out of her. Also I think that thou hast set her spirit traveling, as thou knowest how to do, and such journeys sap the strength of flesh and blood. Perhaps, but now, before it is too late, I would send her body traveling also. Only thou, who hast the power for a while, dost bar the road. I know, said Edo, nodding his head and looking at his companion. We all know, do we not, Hana? We who have heard certain beatings of drums in the night and studied dewdrops beneath the trees at dawn. Thou wouldst send her to meet another traveler. Yes, and if thou art wise, thou wilt let her go. Why should I let her go? Asked the priest passionately. And with her all my greatness? She must reign here, after thee, for at her feet thy tree fell, and it is the will of the people, who weary of dwarf queens and desire one that is tall and beautiful and white. Moreover, when my blood has been poured into her, her wisdom will be great, greater than thine, or that of any mother that went before thee, for she is Wensi, the virgin, and her soul is purer than them all. I will not let her go. If she leaves this holy place where none may do her harm, she shall die, and then her spirit may go to seek that other traveler. Thou art mad, Edo, mad and blind with pride and folly. Let her be, and choose another mother. Now there is Noia. Thy great niece, Nia, who thinks as thou thinkest, and hates those whom thou hatest? Nay, I will have none of that half-breed. Yonder white Nkosazana shall be our queen and no other. Then Edo whispered Nia, leaning forward and looking into his eyes, she shall be the last mother of all this people. Fool! There are those who fight for her against whom thou canst not prevail. Thou knowest them not, but I know them, and I tell thee that they make ready thy doom. Have thy way, Edo. It was not for her that I pleaded with thee, but for the sake of the ancient people of the ghosts, whose fate draws nigh to them. Fool, have thy way, spin thy web, and be caught in it thyself. I tell thee, Edo, that thy death shall be redder than any thou hast ever dreamed, nor shall it fall on thee alone. Begone now, and trouble me no more, till in another place all that is left of thee shall creep to my feet, praying me for a pardon thou shalt not find. Begone, for the last leaf withers on my tree, and tomorrow I passed within the fence. Say to the people that their mother, against whom they rebelled, is dead, and that she bids them prepare to meet the evil which, alive, she warded from their heads. Now Edo strove to answer, but could not, for there was something in the flaming eyes of Nia which frightened him. He looked at Hana, and Hana looked back at him. Then taking each other's hand, they slunk away towards the wall, staggering blindly through the sunshine towards the shade. Richard Darrien remembered drinking a bowl of milk in the hut in which he was imprisoned at Mafuti, and instantly a feeling of cold chill ran to its heart and brain, after which he remembered no more for many a day. At length, however, by slow degrees, and with sundry slips back into unconsciousness, life and some share of his reason and memory returned to him. He awoke to find himself lying in a hut, roughly fashioned of branches, and attended by a Kafir woman of middle age. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Mommy," she answered. "Mommy, Mommy, I know the name, and I know the voice. Say, were you one of the wives of Ibu Bessie, she who spoke with me through the fence?" And he strove to raise himself on his arm to look at her, but fell back from weakness. "Yes, Inkus, I was one of his wives. Was. Then where is Ibubesi now? Dead, Inkus. The fire has burned him up with his kraal, Mafuti. With the kraal, Mafuti? Where then is the Nkosazana? Answer, woman, and be swift, he cried in a hollow voice. Alas, Inkus, alas, she is dead also, for she was in the kraal when the fire swept it, and was seen standing on top of a hut where she had taken refuge, and after that she was seen no more. Then let me die and go to her, exclaimed Richard with a groan, as he fell back upon his bed, where he lay, almost insensible, for 3 more days. Yet he did not die, for he was young and very strong, and Mommy poured milk down his throat to keep the life in him. Indeed, little by little, something of his strength came back, so that at last he was able to think and talk with her again, and learned all the dreadful story. He learned how the people of Mafuti, fearing the vengeance of Dingaan, had fled away from their kraal, carrying what they thought to be his body with them, lest it should remain in evidence against them, and taking all the cattle that they could gather. Every one of them had fled that could travel, only Ibubesi and a few sick and certain folk who chanced to be outside the walls remaining behind. It was from 2 of these who escaped during the burning of the kraal by the Zulus, or by fire from the heavens, they knew not which, that they had heard of the awful end of Ibubesi, and of his prisoner, the Nkosazana. As for themselves, they had traveled night and day till they reached a certain secret and almost inaccessible place in the great Kwathlamba Mountains, in which people had lived, whom Chaka wiped out, and there hidden themselves. In this place they remained, hoping that Dingaan would not care to follow them so far, and proposing to make it their home, since here they found good mealie lands, and, fortunately, the most of their cattle remained alive. That was all the story. There was nothing more to tell. A day or 2 later, Richard was able to creep out of the hut and see the place. It was as Mommy had said, very strong, a kind of tableland ringed around with precipices that could only be climbed through a single narrow neck, and overshadowed by the great Kwathlamba range. The people who were engaged in planting their corn gathered round him, staring at him as though he were one risen from the dead, and greeted him with respectful words. He spoke to several of them, including the 2 men who had seen the burning of Mafuti, though from a little distance. But they could tell him no more than Mommy had done, except that they were sure that the Nkosazana had perished in the flames, as had many of the Zulus, who broke into the town. Richard was sure of it also, who would not have been, and crept back, broken-hearted, to his hut. He who had lost all, and longed that he might die. But he did not die. He grew strong again, and when he was well and fit to travel, went to the headmen of the people, saying that now he desired to leave them, and return to his own place in the Cape Colony. The headmen said, no, he must not leave, for in their hearts they were sure that he would go, not to the Cape Colony, but to Zululand, there to discover all he could as to the death of the Nkosazana. So they told him that with them he must bide, for then if the Zulus tracked them out, they would be able to produce him, who otherwise would be put to the spear, every man of them, as his murderers. The sin of Ibubesi, who had been their chief, clung to them, and they knew well what Dingaan and Tambusa had sworn should happen to those who harmed the white chief Dario, who was under the mantle of their Nkosazana. Richard reasoned with them, but it was no use. They would not let him go. Therefore, in the end, he appeared to fall in with their humor, and meanwhile began to plan escape. One dark night he tried it indeed, only to be seized in the mouth of the neck and brought back to his hut. Next morning the headman spoke with him, telling him that he should only depart thence over their dead bodies, and that they watched him night and day, that the neck, moreover, was always guarded. Then they made an offer to him. He was a white man, they said, and cleverer than they were. Let them come under his wing. Let him be their chief, for he would know how to protect them from the Zulus and any other enemies. He could take over the wives of Ibubesi. At this proposition Richard shuddered. And they would obey him in all things, only he must not attempt to leave them, which he should never do alive. Richard put the proposal by, but in the end, not because he wished it, but by the mere weight of his white man's blood, and for the lack of anything else to do, drifted into some such position. Only at the wives of Ibubesi, or any other wives, he would not so much as look, a slight that gave offense to those women, but made the others laugh. So, for certain long weeks, he sat in that secret nook in the mountains, as the chief of a little Kafir tribe, occupying himself with the planting of crops, the building of walls and huts, the drilling of men, and the settling of quarrels. All day he worked thus, but after the day came the night when he did not work, and those nights he dreaded. For then the languor, not of body but of mind, which the poison the old witch doctoress had given to Ishmael had left behind, would overwhelm him, bringing with it black despair, and his grief would get a hold of him, torturing his heart. For of the memory of Rachel he could never be rid for a single hour, and his love for her grew deeper day by day. And she was dead. Oh, she was dead, leaving him living. One night he dreamed of Rachel, dreamed that she was searching for him and calling him. It was a very vivid dream, but he woke up and it passed away as such dreams do. Only, all the day that followed, he felt a strange throbbing in his head and found himself turning ever towards the north. The next night he dreamed again of her and heard her say, "The search has been far and long, but I have found you, Richard. Open your eyes now, and you will see my face." So he opened his eyes, and there, sure enough, in the darkness, he perceived the outline of her sweet remembered face, about which fell her golden hair. For one moment only he perceived it, then it was gone, and after that her presence never seemed to leave him. He could not see her, he could not touch her, yet she was ever at his side. His brain ached with the thought of her. Her breath seemed to fan his hands and hair. At night her face floated before him, and in his dreams her voice called him, saying, come to me, Richard, I am in need of you. Come to me, I myself will be your guide." Then he would wake, and remembering that she was dead, grew sure and ever surer that the spirit of Rachel was calling him down to death. It called him from the north, always from the north. Soon he could scarcely walk southwards, or east or west, for ere he had gone many yards his feet turned and set his face towards the north. That was to the narrow neck between the precipices which the Kafirs guarded night and day. One evening he went to his hut to sleep, if sleep would come to him. It came, and with it that face and voice, but the face seemed paler, and the voice more insistent. "Will you not listen to me?" it said. "You who were my love, for how long must I plead with you? Soon my power will leave me. The opportunity will be past, and then how will you find me, Richard, my lover? Rise up, and follow ere it be too late, for I myself will be your guide." He awoke. He could bear it no more. Perhaps he was mad, And these were visions of his madness, mocking visions that led him to his death. Well, if so, he still would follow them. Perhaps her body was buried in the north. If so, he would be buried there also. Perhaps her soul dwelt in the north. If so, his soul would fly thither to join it. The Kafirs would kill him in the pass. Well, if so, he would die with his face set northwards, whither Rachel drew him. He rose up and wrapped himself in a cloak of goatskins. He filled a hide bag with sun-dried flesh and parched corn, and hung it about his shoulders with a gourd of water. For, after all, he might live a little while and need food and drink. As he had no gun, he took a staff and a knife and a broad-bladed spear, and leaving the hut, set his face northward, and walked towards the mouth of the neck. At the first step which he took, the torment in his head seemed to leave him, who fought no longer, who had seemed obedient to that mysterious summons. Quietness and confidence possessed him. He was going to his end, but what did it matter? The dream beckoned and he must follow. The moon shone bright, but he took no trouble to hide himself. It did not seem to be worth while. Now he was in the neck and drawing near to the place where the guard was stationed. Still he marched on, boldly, openly. As he thought, they were on the alert. They drew out from behind the rocks and barred his path. "Whither goest thou, Lord Dario?" asked their captain. "Thou knowest that here thou mayest not pass." "I follow a ghost to the north," he answered, "and living or dead I pass." "Ow," said the captain, "he says that he follows a ghost. Well, we have nothing to do with ghosts. Take him, unharmed if possible, but take him." So, urged thereto by their own fears, since for their safety's sake they dared not let him go, the men sprang towards him. They sprang towards him where he stood waiting the end, for give back he would not, and of a sudden fell down upon their faces, hiding their heads among the stones. Richard did not know what had happened to them, that they behaved thus strangely, nor did he care. Only seeing them fallen, he walked on over them, and pursued his way along the neck and down it to the plains beyond. All that night he walked, looking behind him from time to time to see if any followed, but none came. He was alone, quite alone, save for the dream that led him towards the north. At sunrise he rested and slept a while, then, awaking after midday, went on his road. He did not know the road, yet never was he in doubt for a moment. It was always clear to him whither he should go. That night he finished his food and again slept a while, going forward at the dawn. In the morning he met some Kafirs who questioned him, but he answered only that he was following a dream to the north. They stared at him, seemed to grow frightened, and ran away. But presently some of them came back and placed food in his path, which he took and left them. He came to the Kraal Mafuti. It was utterly deserted, and he wandered amidst its ashes. Here and there he found the bones of those who had perished in the fire, and turned them over with his staff, wondering whether any of them had belonged to Rachel. In that place he slept a night, thinking that perhaps his journey was ended, and that here he would die, where he believed Rachel had died. But when he waked at the dawn, it was only to find that something within him still drew him towards the north, more strongly indeed than ever before. So he left what had been the town Mafuti. Walking along the edge of the cleft into which Ishmael had leapt on the fire, he climbed the walls, built with so much toil to keep out the Zulus, and at last came to the river which Rachel had swum. It was low now, and wading it he entered Zululand. Here the natives seemed to know of his approach, for they gathered in numbers, watching him, and put food in his path, but they would not speak to him. And when he addressed them, saying that he followed a dream, and asking if they had seen the dream, they cried out that he was Tagali, bewitched, and fled away. He continued his journey, finding each night a hut prepared for him to sleep in, and food for him to eat till at length, one evening, he reached the great place in Gungundlovu. Through its streets he marched with a set face, while thousands stared at him in silence. Then a captain pointed out a hut to him, and into it he entered, ate, and slept. At dawn he rose, for he knew that here he must not tarry. The spirit face of Rachel still hung before him. The spirit voice still whispered, "Forward, forward to the north. I myself will be your guide." In his path sat the king and his counselors, and around them a regiment of men. He walked through them unheeding, till at length, when he was in front of the king, they barred his road, and he halted. "Who art thou, and what is thy business?" asked an old counselor, with a withered hand. "I am Richard Darrien," he answered, "and here I have no business. I journey to the north, stay me not." "We know thee," said the counselor. "Thou art the Lord Dario, that didst dwell in the shadow of the Nkosazana. Thou art the white chief whom the wild beast Ibubesi slew at the kraal Mafuti. Why does thy ghost come hither to trouble us?" "Living or dead, ghost or man, I travel to the north, stay me not," he answered. "What seekest thou in the north, thou Lord Dario?" "I seek a dream. A spirit leads me to find a dream. Seest thou it not, man with the withered hand?" "Ah," they repeated, "he seeks a dream. A spirit leads him to find a dream in the north." "What is this dream like?" asked Mopo of the withered hand. "Come, stand at my side and look. There, dost thou see it floating in the air before us, thou who hast eyes that can read a dream?" Mopo came and looked, then his knees trembled a little, and he said, "I, Lord Dario, I see and I know that face." "Thou knowest the face, old fool," broke in Dingaan angrily. "Then whose is it?" "O king," answered Mopo, dropping his eyes, "it is not lawful to speak the name, but the face is the face of one who sat where that wanderer stands and showed thee certain pictures in a bowl of water." Now Dingaan trembled, for the memory of those visions haunted him night and day. Moreover, he thought at times that they drew near to their fulfillment. "The white man is mad," he said, "and thou, Mopo, art mad also. I have often thought it, and that it would be well if thou wentest on a long journey for thy health. This Dario shall stay here a while. I will not suffer him to wander through my land, crazing the people with his tales of dreams and visions. Take him and hold him. The circle of the doctors shall inquire into the matter." So Dingaan spoke, who in his heart was afraid, lest this wild-eyed Dario should learn that he had given the Nkosazana to the dwarf folk when she was mad, to appease him after they had prophesied evil to him. Also he remembered that it was because of the murders done by Ibubesi that the Nkosazana had gone mad, and did not understand if Dario had been killed at the kraal Mafuti, how it could be that he now stood before him. Therefore he thought that he would keep him a prisoner until he found out all the truth of the matter, and whether he were still a man or a ghost or a wizard, clothed in the shape of the dead. At the bidding of the king, guards sprang forward to seize Richard, but the old counselor, Mopo, shrunk away behind him, hiding his eyes with his withered hand. They sprang forward, and yet they laid no finger on him, but fell oft to right and left, saying, "Kill us if thou wilt, Black One, but we cannot." "The wizard has bewitched them," said Dingaan angrily. "Hear you, doctors, you whose trade it is to catch wizards. Take this white fellow and bind him." Unwillingly enough, the doctors, of whom there were 8 or 10 setting apart, rose to do the king's bidding. They came on towards Richard, some of them singing songs, and some muttering charms, and as they came he laughed and said, "Beware, you Ambangoba! The dream is looking at you very angrily." Then they too broke away to right and left, crying out that this was a wizard against whom they had no power. Now Dingaan grew mad with wrath, and shouted to his soldiers to seize the white man, and if he resisted them, to kill him with their sticks, for of witchcraft they had known enough in Zululand of late. So thick as bees, the regiment formed up in front of him, shouting and waving their carries, for here in the king's place they bore no spears. "Make way there," said Richard. "I can stay no longer. I must to the north." The soldiers did not stir. Only a captain stepped out, bidding him give up his spear and yield himself or be killed. Richard walked forward, and at a sign from the captain, men sprang at him, lifting their carries, to dash out his brains. Then suddenly, in front of Richard there appeared something faint and white, something that walked before him. The soldiers saw it, and the carries fell from their hands. The regiment behind saw it, and turning, burst away like a scared herd of cattle. They did not wait to seek the gates. They burst through the fence of the enclosure, and were gone, leaving it flat behind them. The king and his counselors saw it also, and more clearly than the rest. "The Nkosazana," they cried. "It is the Nkosazana who walks before him that she loved." And they fell upon their faces. Only Dingaan remained seated on his stool. "Go," he said hoarsely to Richard. "Go, thou wizard, north or south or east or west, if only thou wilt take that spirit with thee, for she bodes evil to my land." So Richard, who had seen nothing, marched away from the kraal, Umgungundlovo, and once more set his face towards the north that drew him as it draws the needle of a compass. The road that Rachel and the dwarfs had traveled, he traveled also. Although from day to day he knew not where his feet would lead him, still he traveled it step by step. Nor did any hurt come to him. In the country where men dwelt, being forewarned of his coming by messengers, they brought him food and guarded him, and when he passed out into the wilderness, some other power guarded him. He had no fear at all. At night he would lie down without a fire, and the lions would roar about him, but they never harmed him. He would plunge into a swamp or a river, and always pass it safely. When water failed, he would find it without search. When there was no food, it would seem to be brought to him. Once an eagle dropped a bustard at his feet. Once he found a buck, fresh slain by leopards. Once when he was very hungry, he saw that he had lain down to sleep by a nest of ostrich eggs, and this food he cooked, making fire after the native fashion, with sharp sticks, as he knew how to do. At length all the swamps were passed, and in the 3rd week of his journeyings he reached the sloping uplands, on the edge of which he awoke one morning to find himself surrounded by a circle of great men, giants, who stood staring at him. He arose, thinking that at last his hour had come, as it seemed to him that they were about to kill him. But instead of killing him, these men saluted him humbly, and offered him food upon their knees, and new hide shoes for his feet, for his own were worn out, and cloaks and garments of skin, which things he accepted thankfully, for by now he was almost naked. Then they brought a litter, and wished him to enter it, but this he refused. Heeding them no more, as soon as he had eaten, and filled his bag and water bottle, he started on towards the north. Indeed, he could not have stayed if he had wished. His brain seemed to be full of one thought only, to travel till he reached his journey's end, whatever it might be. And before his eyes he saw one thing only, the spirit face of Rachel that led him on towards that end. Sometimes it was there for hours, then for hours again it would be absent. When it was present, he looked at it. When it was gone, he dreamed of it. For him it was the same. But one thing was ever with him, that magnet in his heart which drew his feet towards the north, and from step to step showed him the road that he should travel. A number of the giant men accompanied him. He noticed it but took no heed. So long as they did not attempt to stay or turn him, he was indifferent whether they came or went away. As a result, he traveled in much more comfort, since now everything was made easy and ready for him. Thus he was fed with the best that the land provided, and at night shelters were built for him to sleep in. He discovered that a captain of the giants could understand a few words of some native language which he knew, and asked him why they helped him. The captain replied, "By order of the Mother of Trees." Who or what Mother of Trees might be, Richard was unable to discover, so he gave up his attempts at talk and walked on. They traversed the fertile uplands and reached the edge of the fearful desert. It did not frighten him. He plunged into it as he would have plunged into a sea or a lake of fire had it lain in his way. He was like a bird whose instinct at the approach of summer or of winter leads it without doubt or error to some far spot, beyond continents and oceans. Some land that it has never seen leads it in surety and peace to its appointed rest. A guard of the giant men came with him into the desert, also carriers who bore skins of water. In that burning heat, the journey was dreadful, yet Richard accomplished it, wearing down all his escort, until at its further lip but one man was left. There even he sank exhausted, and began to beat upon a little drum that he carried, which drum had been passed on to him by those who were left behind. But Richard was not exhausted. His strength seemed to be greater than it had ever been before, or that which drew him forward had acquired more power. He wondered vaguely why a man should choose such a place and time to play upon a drum, and went on alone. Before him, some miles away, he saw a forest of towering trees that stretched further than his eye could reach. As he approached that forest, heading for a certain tall tree, why he knew not, the sunset dyed it red as though it had been on fire, and he thought that he discerned little shapes flitting to and fro amidst the boles of trees. Then he entered the forest, whereof the boughs arched above him like the endless roof of a cathedral, borne upon innumerable pillars. There was deep gloom that grew presently to darkness, wherein here and there glowworms shone faintly like tapers dying before an altar, and winds sighed like echoes of evening prayers. He could see to walk no longer. Sudden weariness overcame him, so, according to his custom, he laid himself down to sleep at the bole of a great tree. A while had passed, he never knew how long, when Richard was awakened from deep slumber by feeling many hands fiercely at work upon him. These hands were small, like those of children. This he could tell from the touch of them, although the darkness was so dense that he was able to see nothing. Two of them gripped him by the throat, so as to prevent him from crying out. Others passed cords about his wrist, ankles, and middle, until he could not stir a single limb. Then he was dragged back a few paces, and lashed to the bole of a tree, as he guessed, that under which he had been sleeping. The hands let go of him, and his throat being free, he called out for help. But those vast forest aisles seemed to swallow up his voice. It fell back on him from the canopy of huge boughs above. It was lost in the immense silence. Only from close at hand he heard little peals of thin and mocking laughter. So he too grew silent, for who was there to help him here? He struggled to loose himself, for the impalpable power which had guided him so far was now at work within him more strongly than ever before. It called to him to come. It drew him onward. It whispered to him that the goal was near. But the more he writhed and twisted, the deeper did the cruel cords or creepers cut into his flesh. Yet he fought on till, utterly exhausted, his head fell forward and he swooned away. On the day following that, when she had summoned Edo to speak with her, Nia sat at the mouth of the cave. It was late afternoon, and already the shadows gathered so quickly that, save for her white hair, her little childlike shape, withered now almost to a skeleton, was scarcely visible against the black rock. Walking to and fro in her aimless fashion, as she would do for hours at a time, Rachel, accompanied by Noia, passed and repassed her, till at length the old woman lifted her head and listened to something which was quite inaudible to their ears. Then she beckoned to Noia, who led Rachel to her. "Maiden beloved," she said in a feeble voice, after they had sat down in front of her, "my hour has come. I have sent for thee to bid thee farewell till we meet again, in a country where thou hast traveled for a little while. Before the sun sets, I pass within the fence." At this tidings, Rachel began to weep, for she had learned to love this old dwarf woman who had been so kind to her in her misery, and she was now so weak that she could not restrain her tears. "Mother," she said, "for thee it is joy to go. I know it, and therefore cannot wish that thou shouldst stay. Yet what shall I do when thou hast left me alone amidst all these cruel folk? Tell me, what shall I do?" "Perchance thou wilt seek another helper, maiden, and perchance thou shalt find another to guard and comfort thee. Follow thy heart, obey thy heart, and remember the last words of Nia, that no harm shall come to thee. Nay, if I know it, I may tell thee no more, thou who couldst not hear what the drum said to me but now. Farewell." And turning round, she made a sign to certain dwarf mutes who were gathered behind her, as though they awaited her commands. "Hast thou no word for me, mother?" asked Noia. "Aye, child," she answered. "Thy heart is very bold, and thou also must follow it. Though thy sin should be great, perchance thy greater love may pay its price. At least thou art but an arrow set upon the string, and that which must be will be. I think that we shall meet again ere long. Come hither and kneel at my side." Noia obeyed, and for a little space Nia whispered in her ear, while as she listened, Rachel saw strange lights shining in Noia's eyes, lights of terror and of pride, lights of hope and of despair. "What did she say to you, Noia?" asked Rachel presently. "I may not tell, Zula," she answered. "Question me no more." Now the mutes brought forward a slight litter, woven of boughs, on which the withered leaves still hung, boughs from Nia's fallen tree. In this litter they placed her, for she could no longer walk, and lifted it onto their shoulders. For one moment she bade them halt, and calling Rachel and Noia to her, kissed them upon the brow, holding up her thin childlike hands over them in blessing. Then, followed by them both, the bearers went forward with their burden, taking the road that ran up the hill towards the sacred tree. As the sun set, they passed within the fence, and laying down the litter without a word by the bole of the tree, turned and departed. The darkness fell, and through it Rachel and Noia heard Nia singing for a little while. The song ceased, and they descended the hill to the cave, for there they feared to stay, lest the tree should draw them also. They ate a little food, whilst the two women mutes who had sat on each side of Nia when she showed her magic, stared now at them, and now into the bowls of dew that were set before them, wherein they seemed to find something that interested them much. Noya prayed Rachel to sleep, and she tried to do so, and could not. For hour after hour she tossed and turned, and at length sat up, saying to Noya, "I have fought against it, and I can stay here no longer, Noya. I am being drawn from this place out into the forest, and I must go." "What draws thee, sister?" asked Noya. "Is it Edo?" "No, I think not. Nothing to do with Edo." "Oh, Noya, Noya, it is the spirit of Richard Darrien. He is dead, but for days and weeks his spirit has been with my spirit, and now it draws me into the forest to die and find him." "Then that is an evil journey thou wouldst take, Zula." "Not so, Noya. It is the best and happiest of journeys. The thought of it fills me with joy. What said Nia? Follow thy heart. So I follow it, Noya. Farewell, for I must go away." "Nay," answered Noya, "if thou goest, I go, who also was bidden to follow my heart, that is sister to thy heart." Rachel reasoned with her, but she would not listen. The end of it was that the two of them rose and threw on their cloaks. Also, Rachel took the great Umkulu spear, which she had used as a staff on her journey, from the desert to the forest. All this while, the dwarf women watched her, but did nothing, only watched. They left the cave, and walked to the mouth of the zigzag slit in the great wall, which was open. "Perhaps the mutes will kill us in the heart of the wall," said Noya. "If so, the end will be soon and swift," answered Rachel. Now they were in the cleft, following its slopes and windings. Above them they could hear the movements of the guardians of the wall who sat amongst the rough stones, but these did not try to stop them. Indeed, once or twice, when they did not know which way to turn in the darkness, little hands took hold of Rachel's cloak and guided her. So they passed through the wall in safety. Outside of it, Rachel paused a moment, looking this way and that. Then of a sudden she turned and walked swiftly towards the south. It was dark, densely dark in the forest, yet she never seemed to lose her path. Holding Noya by the hand, she wound in and out between the tree trunks, without stumbling or even striking her foot against a root. For an hour or more they walked on thus, the strangest of strange journeys, till at length Rachel whispered, "Something tells me to stay here," and she leaned against a tree and stayed, while Noya, who was tired, sat down between the jutting roots of the tree. It was a dead tree, and the top of it had been torn off in some hurricane, so that they could see the sky above them, and by the gray hue of it knew that it was drawing near to dawn. The sun rose, and its arrows, that even at midday could never pass the canopy of foliage, shot straight and vivid between the tall bare trunks. Oh, Rachel knew the place. It was that place which she had dreamed of as a child in the island of the flooded river. Just so had the light of the rising sun fallen on the boles of the great trees, and on her white cloak and outspread hair, fallen on her and on another. She strained her eyes into the gloom. Now those rays pierced it also, and now, by them, she saw the yellow-bearded, half-naked man of that long-dead dream leaning against the tree. His eyes were shut. Without doubt he was dead. This was but a vision of him who had drawn her hither to share his death. It was the spirit of Richard Darrien. She drew a little nearer, and the eyes opened, gazing at her. Also from that form of his was cast a long shadow. There it lay upon the dead leaves. How came it, she wondered, that a spirit could throw a shadow? And why was a spirit bound to a tree, as now she perceived he was? He saw her, and in those gray eyes of his there came a wonderful look. He spoke. "You have drawn me from far, Rachel, but I have never seen all of you before, only your face floating in the air before me, although others saw you. Now I see you also, so I suppose that my time has come. It will soon be over. Wait a little there, where I can look at you, and presently we shall be together again. I am glad." Rachel could not speak. A lump arose in her throat and choked her. Betwixt fear and hope her heart stood still. Only with the spear in her hand she pointed at her own shadow, thrown by the level rays of the rising sun. He looked, and notwithstanding the straightness of his bonds, she saw him start. "If you are a ghost, why have you a shadow?" he asked hoarsely. "And if you are not a ghost, how did you come into this haunted place?" Still, Rachel did not seem to be able to speak. Only she glided up to him and kissed him on the lips. Now at length he understood, they both understood, that they were still living creatures beneath the sky, not the denizens of some dim world which lies beyond. "Free me," he said in a faint voice, for his brain reeled. "I was bound here in my sleep. They will be back presently." Her intelligence awoke. With a few swift cuts of the spear she held, Rachel severed his bonds, then picked up his own assegai that lay at his feet. She thrust it into his numbed hand. As he took it, the forest about them seemed to become alive, and from behind the boles of the trees around appeared a number of dwarfs, who ran towards them, headed by Edo. Noya sprang forward also, and stood at their side. Rachel turned on Edo swiftly as a startled deer. She seemed to tower over him, the spear in her hand. "What does this mean, priest?" she asked. "Inkosazana," he answered humbly. "It means that I have found a way to tempt thee from within the wall, where none might break thy sanctuary. Thou drewest this man to thee from far, with the strength that old Nya gave thee. We knew it all, we saw it all, and we waited. Day by day, in our bowls of dew, we watched him coming nearer to thee. We heard the messages of Nya on the drums, bidding the Mkulu meet and escort him. We heard the last answering message from the borders of the desert, telling her that he was nigh. Then, while he followed his magic path through the darkness of the forest, we seized and bound him, knowing well that if he could not come to thee, thou wouldst come to him. And thou hast come." "I understand. What now, Edo?" "This, Inkosazana. Thou hast been named Mother of the Trees by the people of the dwarfs. Be pleased to come with us, that we may install thee in thy great office." "This lord here," said Rachel, "is my promised husband. What of him?" Edo bowed and smiled, a fearful smile, and answered, "The Mother of the Trees has no husband. Wisdom is her husband. He has served his purpose, which was to draw thee from within the wall, and for this reason only we permitted him to enter the holy forest living. Now he bides here to die, and since he has won thy love, we will honor him with the white death, bind him to the tree again." In an instant, the spear that Rachel held was at Edo's throat. "Dwarf," she cried, "this is my man, and I am no mother of trees, and no pale ghost, but a living woman. Let but one of these monkeys of thine lay a hand upon him, and thou diest by the red death, Edo, aye, by the red death. Stir a single inch, and this spear goes through thy heart, and thy spirit shall be spilled with thy blood." The little priest sank to his knees trembling, glancing about him for a means of escape. "If thou killest me, thou diest also," he hissed. "What do I care if I die?" she answered. "If my man dies, I wish to die." Then added in English, "Richard, take hold of him by one arm, and Noya take the other. If he tries to escape, kill him at once. or if you are afraid, I will." So they seized him by the arms. "Now," said Rachel, "let us go back to the sanctuary, for there they dare not touch us. We cannot try the desert without water. Also, they would follow us and kill us with their poisoned arrows. Tell him, Noah, that if they do not attempt to harm us, we will set this priest of theirs free within the wall. But if a hand is lifted against us, then he dies at once by the Red Death." touch them not, piped Edo, lest my ghost should be spilled with my blood. Touch them not, I command you. The company of dwarfs chattered together like parrots at the dawn, and the march began. First went Edo, dragged along between Richard and Noah, and after them, the raised spear in her hand, followed Rachel, while on either side, hiding themselves behind the boles of the trees, scrambled the people of the dwarfs. Back they went thus, through the forest, Rachel telling them the road, till at length the huge grey wall loomed up before them. They came to the slit in it, and Noah asked, "What shall we do now? Kill this priest, take him in with us as a hostage, or let him go?" "I said that he should be set free," answered Rachel, "and he would do us more harm dead than living. Also his blood would be on our hands. Take him through the wall and loose him there." So once more they passed the slopes and passages, while the mutes above watched them from their stones with marveling eyes, till they reached the open space beyond, and there they loosed Edo. The priest sprang back out of reach of the dreaded spears, and in a voice thick with rage cried to them, "Fools! You should have killed me while you could, for now you are in a trap, not I. You are strong and great, but you cannot live without food. We may not enter here to hurt you, but you shall starve. You shall starve until you creep out and beg my mercy." Then, making signs to the dwarfs who sat about above, he vanished between the stones. "You should have killed him, Zulu," said Noah, "for now he will live to kill us." "I think not, sister," answered Rachel. "Nia said that I should follow my heart, and my heart bid me let him go. Our hands are clean of his blood, but if he had died, who can tell? Blood is a bad seed to sow." Then, forgetting Edo, she turned to Richard and began to ply him with questions, but he seemed to be dazed and could answer little. It was as though some unnatural supporting strength had been withdrawn, and now all the fatigues of his fearful journey were taking effect upon him. He could scarcely stand, but reeled to and fro like a man in drink, so that the two women were obliged to support him across the burial ground towards the cave. Advancing thus, they entered into the shadow of the holy tree, and there at the edge of it met another procession, descending from the mound. 8 mutes bore a litter of boughs, and on it lay Nia dead, her long white hair hanging down on either side of the litter. With bowed heads they stood aside to let her pass to the grave, made ready for her in the place of honor near the wall, where for 1,000 years only the mothers of the trees had been laid to rest. Then they went on, and entered the cave, where the lamps burned before the great stalactite, and the heap of offerings that were piled about. Here sat the 2 women priests gazing into their bowls, as they had left them. The death of Nia had not moved them. The advent of this white man did not seem to move them. Perhaps they expected him. At any rate, food was made ready, and a bed of rugs prepared on which he could lie. Richard ate some of the food, staring at Rachel all the while with vacant eyes, as though she were still but a vision, the figment of a dream. Then he muttered something about being very tired, and sinking back upon the rugs, fell into a deep sleep. In that sleep he remained, scarcely stirring, for full 24 hours, while Rachel watched by his side, till at length her weariness overcame her, and she slept also. When she opened her eyes again, they saw no other light than that which crept in from the mouth of the cave. The lamps, which always burned there, were out. Noia, who was seated nearby, heard her stir and spoke. "If thou art rested, Zula," she said, "I think that we had better carry the White Lord from this place, for the 2 witch women have gone, and I can find no more oil to fill the lamps." So they felt their way to Richard, proposing to lift him between them, but at Rachel's touch he awoke, and with their help walked out of the cave. In the open space beyond they saw a strange sight, for across it were streaming all the dwarf mutes, carrying their aged and sick and infants, and bearing on their backs, or piled up in litters, their mats and cooking utensils. Evidently they were deserting the sanctuary. "Why are they going?" asked Rachel. "I do not know," answered Noia, "but I think it is because no food has been brought to them as usual, and they are hungry. You remember that Edo said we should starve. Only fear of death by hunger would make them leave a place where they and their forefathers have lived for generations." Presently they were all gone. Not a living creature was left within the wall except these 3, nor were any more dwarves brought in to die beneath the holy tree. Now at length Richard seemed to awake, and taking Rachel by the hand, began to ask questions of her in a low, stammering voice, since words did not seem to come readily to him who had not spoken his own language for so long. "Before you begin to talk, sister," broke in Noia, "let us go and see if we can close the cleft in the wall, for otherwise how shall we sleep in peace? Edo and the dwarfs might creep in by night and murder us." "I do not think they dare shed blood in their holy place," answered Rachel. "Still, let us see what we can do. It may be best." So they went to the cleft, and as the stone door was open, and they could not shut it, at one very narrow spot, they rolled down rocks from the loose sides of the ancient wall above in such a fashion that it would be difficult to pass through or over them from without. This hard task took them many hours. Moreover, it was labor wasted, since, as Rachel had thought probable, the dwarfs never tried to pass the wall, but waited till hunger forced them to surrender. Towards evening they returned to the cave, and collected what food they could find. It was but little, enough for 2 spare meals, no more, nor could they discover any in the town of the dwarfs behind the tree. Only of water they had plenty from the stream that ran out of the cave. They ate a few mouthfuls, then took their mats and cloaks, and went to camp by the opening in the wall, so that they might guard against surprise. Now for the first time they found leisure to talk, and Rachel and Richard told each other a little of their wonderful stories. But they did not tell them all, for their minds seemed to be bewildered, and there was much that they were not able to explain. It was enough for them to know that they had been brought together again thus marvelously, by what power they knew not, and that still living, they who for long weeks had deemed the other dead, were able to hold each other's hands and gaze into each other's eyes. Moreover, now that this had been brought about, they were tired, so tired that they could scarcely speak above a whisper. The end of it was that they fell asleep, all of them, and so slept till morning, when they awoke somewhat refreshed, and ate what remained of the food. The second day was like the first, only hotter and more sultry. Noia climbed to the top of the wall to watch, while Richard and Rachel wandered about among the little ant-heap-like graves, and through the dwarf village, talking and wondering, happy even in their wretchedness. But before the day was gone, hunger began to get a hold of them. Also the terrible, stifling heat oppressed them, so that their words seemed to die between their lips, and they could only sit against the wall, looking at one another. Towards evening, Noia descended from the wall and reported that large numbers of the dwarfs were keeping watch without. flitting to and fro between the trunks of the trees like shadows. The stifling night went by, and another day dawned. Having no food, they went to the stream and drank water. Then they sat down in the shadow and waited through the long hot hours. Towards evening, when it grew a little cooler, they gathered up their strength and tried to find some way of escape before it was too late. Richard suggested that as flight was impossible, they should give themselves up to the dwarfs, but Rachel answered no, for then Edo would certainly kill him and Noia, and take her to fill the place of the mother of the trees until she became useless to him, when she would be murdered also. Then there is nothing left for us but to die, said Richard. Nothing but to die, she answered, to die together, and, dear, that should not be so hard, seeing that for so long we have thought each other dead apart. Yet it is hard, answered Richard, after living through so much, and being led so far, to die at last and go whither we know not before our time. Rachel looked at Noia, who sat opposite to them. Her head rested on her hand. Have you anything to say, sister? She asked. Yes, Zula. Here is a little moss that I have found upon the stones, and she produced a small bundle. Let us boil it and eat. It will keep us alive for another day. What is the use? Asked Rachel, unless there is more. There is no more, said Noia, for the leaves of yonder tree are deadly poison, and here grows no other living thing. Still, eat and live on, for I wait a message. A message from whom? Asked Rachel. A message from the dead, sister. It was promised to me by Nia before she passed, and if it does not come, then it will be time to die. So they made fire, and boiled the moss till it was a horrible sticky substance, which they swallowed as best they could, washing it down with gulps of water. Still it was food of a kind, and for a while stayed the gnawing empty pains within them. Only Noia ate but little, so that there might be more for the others. That night was even hotter than those that had gone before, and during the day which followed the place became like a hell. They crept into the cave and lay there gasping, while from without came loud cracking sounds, caused, as they thought, by the trees of the forest splitting in the heat. About midday, the sky suddenly became densely overcast, although no breath stirred. The air was thicker than ever. To breathe it was like breathing hot cream. In their restless despair they wandered out of the cave, and to their surprise saw a dwarf standing upon the top of the wall. It was Edo, who called to them to come out and give themselves up. What are the terms? Asked Noia. That thou and the wanderer shall die by the white death, and that the Inkosazana shall be installed mother of the trees, was the answer. We refuse them, said Noia. Let us go now, and give us food and escort, and thou shalt be spared. Refuse, and it is thou and thy people who will die by that red death which Nia promised thee. That we shall learn before tomorrow, said Edo with a mocking laugh, and vanished down the wall. As he went, a hot gust of wind burst upon them, causing the forest without to rock and groan. Noia turned her face towards it and seemed to listen. What is it? Asked Rachel. I heard a voice in the wind, sister, she answered. The message I awaited has come to me. What message? Asked Richard listlessly. That I will tell you by and by, chief, she answered. Come to the cave. It is no longer safe here. The hurricane breaks. So supporting each other, they crept back to the cave, and there Noia made fire, feeding it with the idols and precious woods that had been brought thither as offerings. Richard and Rachel watched her wondering, for it seemed strange that she should make a fire in that heat where there was nothing to cook. Meanwhile, gust succeeded gust, until a tempest of screaming wind swept over them, though no rain fell. Soon it was so fierce that the deep-rooted tree of the tribe rocked above them, and loose stones were blown from the crest of the great wall. Then of a sudden Noah sprang up and seized a flaming brand from the fire. It was the limb of a fetish, made of some resinous wood. She ran from the cave swiftly, before they could stop her, and vanished in the gathering gloom, to return again in a few moments, weak and breathless. "Come out now," she said, "and see a sight such as you shall never behold again." And there was something so strange in her voice that, notwithstanding their weakness, they rose and followed her. Outside the cave, they could not stand because of the might of the hurricane, but cast themselves upon the ground, and following Noah's outstretched arm, looked up towards the top of the mound. Then they saw that the tree of the tribe was on fire. Already its vast trunk and boughs were wrapped in flame, which burnt furiously because of the resin within them, while long flakes of blazing moss were being swept away to leeward, to fall among the forest that lay beyond the wall. "Did you do this?" cried Rachel to Noah. "Aye, Zulu, who else? That was the message which came to me. Now my office is fulfilled, but you too will live, though I must die. I who have destroyed the people of the dwarfs. I who was born that I should destroy them." "Destroyed them?" exclaimed Rachel. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when their tree dies, they die, the whole race of them. Oh, Nia told me. They die as their tree dies, by fire. To the wall now, and look, follow me." Forgetting their hunger-bred weakness in the wild excitement of that moment, Rachel and Richard struggled hand in hand after Noah's thin, ethereal form. Across the open space they struggled, through the furious bufferings of the gale, sometimes on their feet, sometimes on their hands and knees, till they came to the great wall, where a stairway ran up it to an outlook tower. Up this stair they climbed slowly, since at times the weight of the wind pinned them against the blocks of stone, till at length they reached its crest and crept into the shelter of the hollow tower. Hence, looking through the loopholes in the ancient masonry, they saw a fearful sight. The flakes of burning moss from the tree of the tribe had fallen among the tops of the forest, parched almost to tinder with drought and heat, and fired them here and there. Fanned by the screaming gale, the flames spread rapidly, leaping from tree to tree, now in one direction, now in another, as the hurricane veered, which it did continually, till the whole green forest became a sheet of fire, an ever-widening sheet which spread east and west and north and south for miles and miles and tens of miles. Earth and sky were one blaze of light, given out by the torch-like resinous trees as they burned from the top downwards. By that intense light, the three watchers could see hundreds of the people of the dwarfs flitting about between the trunks. Waving their arms and gibbering, they rushed this way and that, to the north to be met by fire, to the south to be met by fire, till at length the blazing boughs and boles fell upon them, and they disappeared in showers of red sparks, or, more fortunate, fled away, never to return, before the flame that leapt after them. One company of them ran towards the sanctuary. They could see them threading their path between the trees, and growing ever fewer, as the burning branches fell upon them from above. They leapt, they ran, they battled, springing this way and that, but ever the great flaring boughs crashed down among them, crushing them, shriveling them up, till at length, of all their number, but a single man staggered into the open belt between the edge of the forest and the wall. His white hair and his garments seemed to be smoldering. He gripped at them with his hands, then, coming to a little bush, it was the top of Nia's tree, which she had thrust into the ground to grow there, dragged it up, and began to beat himself with it as though to extinguish the flames. In an instant it took fire also, burning him horribly, so that with a yell he threw it to the ground and ran on towards the wall. As he came, they saw his face. It was that of Edo. At this moment, seized by some weakness, Noya sank down upon the stones. Richard bent over her to lift her to her feet again, but she thrust him away, saying slowly and in gasps, "Let me be. The doom has hold of me. I am dying. I passed within the fence to fire the tree, and its poison is at work within me, and the curse of all my people has fallen on my head. Yet I have saved thee, my sister. I have saved thee and thy lover. For the dwarfs are no more. The grey people are grey ashes. For my love's sake I did the sin. Let my love atone the sin if it may, or at the least think kindly of me, through the long happy years that are to come, and at the end of them then seek for lost Noya in the world of ghosts if she may be found there." As she spoke, they heard a sound of something scrambling among the stones, and at one of the 4 entrances of the turret there appeared a hideous, fire-twisted face and a little form about which hung charred and smoldering strips of raiment. It was Edo, who had climbed the wall and found them out. There he sat, glowering at them, or rather at Noya, who was crouched upon the floor. "Come hither, daughter of Siapi," he screamed in his hissing snake-like voice. "Come hither and see thy work, thou who hast made an end of the ancient people of the ghosts. Come hither and tell me why thou didst this thing, for I would learn the truth before I die, that I may make report of it to the fathers of our race." Noya heard and crept towards him. To Rachel and Richard, it seemed as though she could not disobey that summons. Now they sat face to face outside the turret, clinging to the stones, and her long hair flowed outwards on the gale. "I did it, Edo," she said, "to save one whom I love, and him who she loves. I did it to avenge the death of Nia upon you all, as she bade me to do. I did it because the cup of thy wickedness is full, and because I was appointed to bring thy doom upon thee. Thus ends the greatness thou hast plotted so many years to win, Edo." "Aye," he answered, "thus it ends, for the magic of the White One there has overcome me, and thus with it ends the reign of the Ghost Kings and the forest wherein they reigned, and thus too thou endest, traitress, who hast murdered them, and whose soul shall be spilt with their souls." As the words left his lips, suddenly Edo sprang upon Noya and gripped her about the middle. Richard and Rachel leaped forward, but before ever they could lay a hand upon her to save her, the dwarf in his rage and agony had dragged her to the edge of the wall. For a moment they struggled there in the vivid light of the flaming forest. Then Edo screamed aloud, one wild, savage shriek, and still holding Noya in his arms, hurled himself from the wall, to fall crushed upon its foundation stones 60 feet beneath. Thus perished Noya, who for love's sake gave her life to save Rachel, as once Rachel had saved her. It was morning, and after the tempest the sky was clear and cool, for heavy rain had fallen when the wind dropped, although far away the dense clouds of rolling smoke showed where the great fire still ate into the heart of the forest. Rachel and Richard, seated hand in hand in the little tower on the wall, looked at one another in that pure light and saw signs in each other's face that could not be mistaken. "What shall we do?" asked Richard. "Death is very near to us." Rachel thought a while and answered, "The dwarfs are gone. We have nothing more to fear from them. Yonder, where the fire did not burn, dwell their slaves, whose villages are full of food, and beyond them live the Nkulu, who know and would befriend me. Let us go and seek food, who desire to live on together, if we may." So they climbed down the wall, and with difficulty, for they were very feeble, crawled over the stones which they had piled up in the passage to keep out the dwarfs, and thus passed to the open belt beyond. A strange scene met their eyes. All the wide lands that had been covered with giant trees were now piled over with white ashes, amongst which, here and there, stood a black and smoldering trunk. The journey was terrible, but following a ridge of rock whereon no great trees had grown. Hand in hand, they passed through the outer edge of the burnt forest in safety, until they came to one of the towns of the slaves upon the fertile plain beyond, which led up to the desert. No human being could they see, since all had fled, but the kraal was full of sheep and cattle that had been penned there before the fire began, and in the huts were milk and food in plenty. They drank of the milk, and after a while ate a little, then rested and drank more milk, till their strength began to return to them. Towards evening they went out of the town, and standing on a mound, looked at the fire-wasted plain behind, and the green, grassy slopes in front. They seemed quite alone in the world, those two, and yet their hearts were full of joy and thankfulness, for while they were left to each other, they knew that they could never be alone. "See, Rachel," said Richard, pointing to the smoldering wreck of the forest, "there lies our past, and here in front of us spreads the future clothed with flowers." "Yes, Richard," she answered, "but Noya and all whom I love say you are buried in that past, and in front of us the desert is not far away. Life is ours, Rachel, and love is ours, and that which saved us through many a danger and brought me back to you will surely keep us safe. Do you fear to pass the desert at my side?" She looked at him with shining eyes and answered, "No, Richard, I fear no more, for now I seem to hear the voice of Noya speaking in my heart, telling me that trouble is behind us, and that we shall live out our lives together, as my mother foresaw that we should do." And there on the mound, standing between that dead sea of ashes and the green slopes of flowering plain, Rachel stretched out her arms to the man to whom she was decreed. End of The Ghost Kings by H. Rider Haggard. Read by Derek Trial. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.